Chapter 292. As for Shiheng, when he led the 40,000 troops out of the Langfang and came to the wilderness, he was like a live target, being attacked all the time. Short bows were used when they were close, and long bows were used when they were far away. When he sent a limited number of cavalry to chase after them, the other party ran away faster than a rabbit. Shiheng's mouth was filled with blisters due to the tactic of, you walk, he disturbs, you stop, he hits, you chase after him. He was really furious, but he didn't have any better ideas. Originally, the army could have covered dozens of kilometers in half a day, but it took more than a day. It was not until the evening of the second day that they arrived at Tianjin Guard. As soon as he entered, the scene he saw made Shiheng feel like he had been played and cheated. There were still Ming soldiers standing guard at the gate of Tianjin Guard, and the people in the city walked as usual in an orderly manner. How was this even the slightest bit like he was being attacked and trying to rescue someone? Shiheng, who couldn't figure out what was going on, immediately sent someone to call the Baihu officer who was guarding the city. Only then did he learn that the Japanese samurai had suddenly disappeared 4 days ago. As for where they went, they didn't know. They had also sent a fast horse to the capital to inform about this matter. However, it was obvious that something had happened to the fast horse. Otherwise, it would have run into Governor Shiheng, who was hurrying over. Ran away? Disappeared? Shiheng did not think about why he did not encounter a fast horse on his way here. He was now thinking about why the Japanese samurai had disappeared. Could it be that they could really fly into the sky and hide in the ground? Did you search the city? Since he had already entered Tianjin Guard and ensured the safety of this place, his mission could be considered a success. Next, he had to consider how to expand the results of the battle. At least, he had to catch some Japanese samurai, preferably alive, and bring them back to the capital as prisoners of war. In this way, his position in the army would be more stable. No. The Baihu officer guarding the city shook his head with some difficulty. In fact, with the number of troops in his hands, he did not dare to do such a thing. He was naturally happy that the Japanese army did not appear. How could he take the initiative to look for them? Trash. Hearing the official's reply, Shiheng's face was naturally filled with displeasure. Then, as the commander-in-chief, he gave the order to take over the city's defense. He also requested that starting from the next morning, there should be a large-scale manhunt in the city. He did not believe that the Japanese army would withdraw so completely. There must be some people left behind to inquire about the news. As long as they could catch them, it would be a great achievement. Because of Shiheng's arrival, the Tianjin Guard became even more chaotic. The people in the city, who had just rested for a few days, found that the reinforcements of the Great Ming Dynasty had rushed into the people's homes like tigers and wolves. They rushed into the shops on the streets, rushed into the mansions, and rushed into the mansions. Speaking of which, these Ming soldiers had been suppressing a bellyful of anger. Along the way, they were constantly ambushed. Now that they finally had a chance to vent their anger, how could they be courteous? Immediately, they would not let go of any suspicious place in the city. Those who were wrongly arrested filled up the entire prison cell. This naturally caused the people's hearts to be in chaos. The elderly and children were bullied, women were bullied, and adult men were wrongly arrested as spies. It was not uncommon for them to be wrongly arrested. The atmosphere in the city was foul and chaotic. These Ming soldiers had just joined not long ago and had not undergone systematic training. Even in terms of military discipline, their self-discipline was extremely poor. Now, they could openly do some things that they did not dare to do before. It was like a competition to see who could snatch more women, who could bully people better, and who could extort more money. Most of them were sent to Commander-in-Chief Shiheng. As the general in charge of the army, his subordinates would naturally give him a lot of benefits. Looking at the silver tails that were quickly piled up like a mountain, Shiheng, who originally wanted to restrain his subordinates, simply shut his mouth. If he wanted the soldiers to work for him, he had to give them benefits. As long as they were obedient and obeyed his orders, he could just turn a blind eye to some small mistakes. After a large-scale search, they really did find something. Some of the Japanese descendants who originally lived here were captured and then treated as spies for the Japanese army. They were tortured, and in the end, they would say whatever you wanted them to say. These real Japanese people who had gone into hiding when the Tianjin garrison was attacked by the so-called Japanese army became scapegoats at this moment. In the end, more than 300 people were captured, and their case files were pushed to Shiheng. With this harvest, Shiheng's expression finally improved. Thinking that the emperor was probably waiting for good news in the capital, he personally wrote a letter and wrote down his harvest. For example, on the way from the capital, he had fought dozens of battles with the Japanese army. In the end, he had successfully killed more than 10,000 people and captured more than 300, but his own army had also lost more than 10,000 people. The written battle report, which could also be said to be a request for merit, was quickly sent to the capital by horse. He continued to abuse his power in the Tianjin garrison, waiting for the emperor's reward. Then, he would find a suitable time to return to the capital as a meritorious official. Although the Japanese army had not been found, the silence of the past few days had given Shiheng the idea that all the enemies had fled. Moreover, he was defending the city this time, so he was not afraid of a small group of enemy sneak attacks. Presumably, there was no chance. These Japanese soldiers, who had problems with food and shelter, should have retreated to the sea. After all, they had come from afar, and without sufficient supplies, they could not stay in a foreign country for too long. In order to allow the Japanese troops to retreat, Shiheng even intentionally ignored the defensive line at the port outside the city. He only sent less than 100 Ming soldiers there and ordered that once the Japanese troops appeared, they were not to fight them head-on, but to retreat. They only needed to watch from afar and report back what happened. On the second night after Shiheng entered the Tianjin garrison, the Japanese army really did appear. It was impossible to hide their vast army, and they were discovered the moment they appeared. The 100 Ming soldiers were extremely obedient and quickly withdrew. They watched as more than 10,000 people entered the harbor and then left on ships that had appeared at some point. When Shiheng learned that the Japanese army had retreated, he was naturally overjoyed. Although the process of this battle was difficult and complicated, so much so that he didn't really manage to eliminate the enemy once from the beginning to the end, the result was good. Their army retreated, and his mission could be considered completed. He could finally report to the emperor. Full of joy, Shiheng immediately had someone write a report of the victory. He wanted to tell the emperor and the officials in the court the good news as soon as possible. At the same time, he wanted to take this opportunity to publicize his achievements and take advantage of the opportunity to obtain some benefits. In the Great Ming, the Loyalty Guild was not the only one who fought. Shiheng could also do the same. Then, he sent out soldiers to take the more than 300 real Japanese people who were stationed in the Great Ming Dynasty in prison wagons, and then 1,000 soldiers marched back to the capital. According to Shiheng's intention, everywhere he went, he had to announce it with great fanfare, as if he was afraid that others would not know what he had done. The report of the victory was sent in advance. Without Gao Xiong stopping it, the road was smooth. In just one night, the news reached the capital. When Zhu Qiyu, the emperor in the imperial palace, heard the news, he was naturally overjoyed and applauded. This time, Shiheng had defeated the Japanese army. The significance of this was not as simple as winning a battle. More importantly, through this battle, as the emperor, he had also gained a reputation for being able to recognize people and use them well. This greatly stabilized his position as the emperor, and it also greatly weakened the influence of the loyalty duke in the military and in the hearts of the people. If one day, he stabilized everything, he would not have so many concerns when he wanted to take action against the meritorious officials. After the officials heard the news, they were both happy and sad. Naturally, those who were happy were those who supported the emperor and those who were on good terms with Shiheng. It had been like this for generations. Only when the military was stabilized, other things could be done easily. Only then would they have the confidence to do things and be able to do better. There were not many officials who were sad, only a few. For example, the Minister of Rights, Hu Chang, the left assistant minister, He Wenyuan, the Minister of Personnel, Wang Ji, and the left assistant minister of Justice, Suyozhen. They were either openly or inwardly on Yang Chendong's side. Originally, they thought that the naval invasion of the Japanese army would not be so easy to solve. In the end, they would even need the loyalty duke to come forward. But now, Shiheng had been captured so easily. In this case, Yang Chendong's influence would be greatly weakened. Even when they wanted to take action against this person in the future, they would have fewer concerns. Yang Chendong did nothing. After defeating Walla, he handed over all his military power and stayed in the Yang family manor, teaching and educating people. He rarely came to the capital. But his influence in the military and in the hearts of the people had always been great. The name of the god of war was well known throughout Qianletong. It seemed that as long as he took action, there was nothing that could not be solved. Now that there was a substitute, it was no wonder that those who cared about him were so anxious. In contrast to the worries of others, Yang Chendong was much calmer. Even when he heard the news from Shiheng, his expression remained the same. He stood in the room in the main hall and watched Hu Yan, Xiao Yin, Lady Xiang, and seventh sister play mahjong. The immortal abode still had many programs to arrange. Lady Shui remained there, and seventh sister, Yang Duo, took her place. Even if seventh sister did not come out as a substitute, there were still backup players. For example, Junko. Even though there were enough people, she still sat obediently to the side. From time to time, she would pour tea and water for everyone, appearing very obedient. Chapter 293. Ever since Shiheng and the others came to the Yang village to ask for her and were rejected by Yang Chendong, Junko recognized one fact. In the following days, unless she could return to Japan safely, she must be protected by Yang Chendong. This fact immediately changed Junko's mentality. Her original idea of talking to him as an equal had long been thrown out of her mind. Now, she seemed to have become a sensible maid, giving people the feeling that she was very well behaved. Junko showed this obedient side of her very well. She often left her shadow in the places where Yang Chendong appeared most often. By doing so, not only could he please Yang Chendong, but he could also please the madams. During these days in the Yang village, Junko could see that there were not many people who could influence the East Marshal, but the wives seemed to be able to do it. Therefore, she completely put down her pride and tried her best to please him. Junko was young and very beautiful. Yang Chendong seemed to take good care of her in the past. On this point, the first wife, Hu Yan, and the second wife, Xiao Yin, had already communicated with each other. Marrying Yang Chendong was tantamount to falling into a nest of happiness. This was not only reflected in the aspects of food and clothing, but also in the way of thinking. For example, after marrying Yang Chendong, she didn't have to be like other women who didn't go out of the house when they had nothing to do. Usually, she would just stay in her small courtyard and wait to take care of her husband and teach her children. This way of doing things, who knew how many talented women's aspirations had been destroyed because of it, eventually making them mediocre and ordinary. This might also be a kind of sorrow for women in a male-dominated society. They were destined to be men's accessories and dependents. Most of them looked like they didn't know how to live without their husbands. All of this, in Yang Chendong's eyes, was completely different. Even if you become Madame Yang, it won't stop you from doing other things. On the contrary, as long as one was willing, one could get 100% support in whatever one did. Even if one wanted to go out to play or spend money, no one would stop them, and no one would say anything. There was also no supervision and questioning from the in-laws. In modern terms, this was the absolute liberal party. No one would say what one should or should not do after marriage. No one would interfere with one's freedom. No one would even ask when one wanted to have a child. Even now, this was what many women hoped for in their hearts. After all, people liked freedom. Wouldn't it be better to play and see more while one was still young? Speaking of children, none of the 4 wives had gotten pregnant so far. This was also deliberately done by Yang Chendong. Including Hu Yan, she was now less than 20 years old. She was definitely a young girl in today's society. Yang Qindong admitted that it was too early to have a child at such a young age. He remembered that he once accidentally read a book that said that the best age for women to give birth was 22 to 27 years old. Even if it was for the health of his wives, he decided to wait. Yang Qindong gave his wives enough freedom and care. In return, they would naturally think of their husbands. Take Junko's matter for example. After Hu Yan and Xiao Yin discussed it, they decided to help the two of them. They could see that there were feelings between the two of them. Of course, no woman was willing to share the man she liked with others. It was just that in the society at that time, it was normal for a man to have 3 wives and 4 concubines. Some even had many mistresses outside. Because of this, families were not harmonious. There were even many people who caused trouble for Xiao Chang. However, these did not seem to be a problem in Yang Qindong's eyes. Because he had enough ability to care for each of his wives. This ability did not only refer to financial resources and power, but also to his body. At night, he was full of energy. Sometimes, Hu Yan and the other 3 women could not handle him. This might have something to do with his modern brain and ancient body. In this regard, sometimes Yang Qindong wondered if he had gone through something unknown that caused his body to mutate. Was that why he was so strong? Naturally. There was no man who did not want to be strong in this aspect. All in all, the result was good. Since Yang Qindong couldn't find the reason, he didn't probe any further. It was precisely because Yang Qindong was too perfect in all aspects that Hu Yan and Xiao Yin decided to pull Junko in as a sister after discussing it. It was just that there were some things that could not be said directly. Otherwise, it would be easy to overreach. This was why they took things slowly. First, they allowed Junko to enter the main hall and watch them play mahjong. It was an opportunity to slowly integrate into the group. Junko was given this opportunity, so naturally, she would cherish it. It was also after entering this place that she saw more deeply that Yang Qindong was different. His care for his wives and his 7th sister made him more tender in Junko's heart. Junko even had thoughts that being able to marry Yang Qindong was not a bad thing. It seemed that he was very good to his wives and did not have any intention of treating them differently. Several times, she saw the 2nd wife, Xiao Yin, and the 1st wife, Hu Yan, playing with each other. Just this scene alone was something that would never happen in the other great clans. It was because she slowly integrated that her impression of Yang Qindong became better and better. Junko believed that men should be like this. They should have an iron-blooded side, but they should also have a tender side. They should be decisive in doing things, but also have enough patience to get along with their loved ones. In these aspects, it seemed that Yang Qindong did very well and was impeccable. The mahjong game was still going on, but a few people were still thinking about it. At this moment, Tiger's Mane quietly came in and cast a look at Yang Qindong, indicating that there was news. Let's talk here, there are no outsiders. Yang Qindong saw that Tiger's Mane had finally appeared, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly, revealing a smile that no one knew. Even his eyes, intentionally or unintentionally, swept over Junko, who was sitting there with a heavy heart. The young master asked him to talk, so it was not a shameful thing. After a little hesitation, Tiger's Mane bowed his head and respectfully said, "Young master, there is a battle report from the front. Commander Shiheng led the army to defeat the Japanese army and has driven them back to the sea." Pa! A fruit plate full of melon seeds and peanuts suddenly fell to the ground. Needless to say, all of this was naturally Junko's masterpiece. As the princess of the Japanese imperial family, she was naturally more concerned about the situation in the front than other people. Now that she knew the truth, how could she not panic? The fruit plate that suddenly fell to the ground happened to be at Hu Yan's feet. Almost without hesitation, she bent down to help clean up. While cleaning up, she said to Yang Qindong, "Rokaru, you know that we are playing mahjong here, but you still want to ruin our fun. Let's talk about business in the study." "Madam's order, I have to obey." Yang Qindong smiled and joked, and then strode away. From beginning to end, he did not look at Junko, as if the gaffe just now did not happen. In the main hall, Junko was absent-mindedly cleaning up the mess on the ground. The comforting voices of Hu Yan and the other women sounded, and even the seventh sister, Yang Duo, said that the war was originally a man's business, and they did not need to worry so much. The women did not know Junko's identity, so it was not wrong to say so. For this reason, Junko kept thanking them, but in her heart, she wondered if the defeat of the Japanese army had any impact on her father. What could she do? Although she did not know about the dispatch of troops this time, as the Princess of Japan, of course, she still hoped that her country could win. In the study, Tiger's man talked about the details of the investigation by the Security Bureau, and even the reactions of some courtiers. For example, the deputy censor of the censorate, Dong Chunhua, even let people set off firecrackers at home, and the commander of the Genie Guard, Lu Gui, called a large group of subordinates to book a restaurant to celebrate. Don't worry about that, some people always like to be sad after joy. For these things, Yang Chendong casually waved and put it aside. Then, after a few breaths, he said, in this way, arrange for Yang Bao to immediately print the news and spread the news of Shi Heng's victory, so that the people in the place where Yang Bao is present will know about it. Yang Bao? Spread the news? At this moment, Tiger's man stared with a puzzled face. He really couldn't figure out why the young master wanted to cheer for Shi Heng. Hee, if you want a person to fall hard enough, then you have to raise him high enough, right? Yang Chendong's voice sounded like he was explaining, but it also sounded like he was giving advice. Oh, raise him to death. I understand, young master. Tiger's man was suddenly enlightened. As one of the most trusted people of Yang Chendong, he knew that the ones who really left at sea were not Gao Xiong's main force, but more than 10,000 captured Ming Dynasty troops. In other words, Gao Xiong and the others hadn't left. They had just created an illusion. However, in the joy of victory, or perhaps it could be said that Shi Heng, who urgently needed a victory, and even Dai Zong and Zhu Qiyu, who also needed a victory, seemed to have overlooked those wounded soldiers. Since the other side had exposed a flaw, Yang Chendong would not let it go and spread the news of the victory. If the final result was not like this, then the slap in the face would be loud enough. At that time, whether it was Shi Heng or Dai Zong, their expressions would be very interesting. More than 10,000 wounded soldiers suddenly disappeared. In the face of the news of the victory, people took the initiative to ignore it. But the truth was the truth, and it would not happen just because you did not want to see it. The Minister of War, Yi Ming, hurried into the depths of the royal palace at the end of court the next day and saw Dai Zong and Zhu Qiyu, whose face was still covered in joy. Chapter 294. May your Majesty live for 10,000 years. After kneeling on the ground, Yi Ming handed over a memorial that his subordinate had just handed to him. From start to finish, he didn't dare to raise his head to look at the emperor's expression. Official Yi, why do you have to be so courteous? Quickly rise. Zhu Qiyu was in a good mood, so his attitude toward Yi Ming was much more amiable than usual. But when he saw Yi Ming kneel on the ground, he was still shocked. The Ming dynasty was particular about ruling the world together with the scholar officials. Unless one was guilty, there was no need to kneel when meeting alone. Chief Eunuch Jining, who had also sensed that the atmosphere was not right, walked down the steps and took the memorial that Yi Ming had handed over to Zhu Qiyu. After receiving the memorial, Zhu Qiyu's expression changed a little. I wonder what memorial this is to make official Yi so anxious. As if to encourage himself, the memorial was opened. Then, he saw the young emperor's expression change greatly. The memorial wrote that the 10,000 wounded soldiers of the Ming dynasty who should have returned to the capital the day before yesterday had suddenly disappeared. They had all been injured on their way from the capital to the Tianjin Guard. Originally, they had been ordered by Commander-in-Chief Shi Heng to return to the capital from outside Langfang City. But there had been no news of them even now. In order to confirm this news, the Ministry of War had already sent out 5 groups of scouts on fast horses to search, but there was still no news. They wrote a memorial and sent it to Yi Ming. After Yi Ming received this conclusion, he didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly entered the palace to see the emperor. At this time, his head was very low. He knew very well what this meant, how terrible the situation was, and how serious his dereliction of duty was. How could he dare to raise his head to look into Zhu Qiyu's eyes? Clap! The memorial flew down from the throne room and hit Yi Ming's head. Then, Zhu Qiyu's roar rang out, "What the hell is going on here? 10,000 wounded soldiers, even 10,000 pigs can't have no news, right? Give us an explanation." Zhu Qiyu's temper had always been good, and he rarely lost his composure in front of his subjects. But now, he had no choice but to get angry. If the memorial was true, then not only had the Japanese army not disappeared, it was even approaching the capital. In other words, a second battle to defend the capital was about to begin. Her head was extremely low as she cursed Shiheng from head to toe in her heart. If it wasn't for this person's desire for grandiose achievements, the Ministry of War wouldn't have been so careless. Now, nearly 10,000 wounded soldiers had disappeared into thin air, and the blame had fallen entirely on the Ministry of War, and on his head. Listening to the emperor's questions, Yi Ming wanted to raise his head several times to say something, but in the end, he didn't open his mouth. There was no way for him to explain such a thing. If he tried to explain himself, it would only make the emperor even angrier. Search. Send everyone out. You must find these wounded soldiers. In addition, inform the military office of the 5 cities to increase the defense of the capital's gates to prevent any accidents. Zhu Qiyu closed his eyes as he spoke. He had a bad feeling. The so-called victory of Shiheng might not be so real, and he might have been fooled. As if he had been pardoned, Yi Ming repeatedly agreed and then crawled out of the hall. After he left the palace, the entire scout camp of the Ministry of War became busy. All the scouts who were still at home, and those who could still move, were sent out without exception. Not only the Ministry of War, but Yi Ming also ordered Jining to ask the embroidered uniform guards and the Eastern faction guards to go out and search. These people were the best at finding clues from the smallest of clues. Immediately, the Ministry of War, the Eastern faction guards, and the embroidered uniform guards all began to work. With the cooperation of the 3 parties, they soon made a new discovery in the afternoon. In a low-lying area beside the official road from the capital to Langfang, hundreds of burned corpses of Ming soldiers were found. After confirming that they were Shiheng's subordinates, they had escorted more than 300 Japanese prisoners of war back to the capital to be presented. Unexpectedly, a portion of them had died here. Needless to say, this was done by Yang Qindong's men. His goal this time was not only to create a tense atmosphere before the war, but also to stabilize his position and influence. At the same time, he wanted to use this opportunity to provoke a war between the Great Ming and Japan. Given the Great Ming's usual behavior and the influence of their belief in Confucianism, it was more difficult than ascending to the heavens to get them to take the initiative to go to war. Yang Qindong's ambition was to let all the Han people in the world stand at the peak of the world, to let all the Han people in the world receive the greatest respect and dignity. Naturally, Japan, which was very close to him, had long been included in his plans. However, he did not know how long it would take for the cold front to take shape and have enough people and a huge fighting force. Yang Qindong, who always had the mindset of seizing every minute, thought of this method. First, he would test the Japanese and see how strong they were. At the same time, he would weaken their strength and lay a solid foundation for his future conquest. In order to achieve this goal, a group of the 300 Japanese merchants and people in the Great Ming had to be released and let them return to Japan to spread the news. Naturally, these people would not be allowed to return to the Great Ming capital as prisoners of war. This was the reason for the Battle of Robbery. Originally, he wanted to win this battle without bloodshed. At most, he would let some of the Ming soldiers suffer some light injuries and temporarily lose the ability to fight. But to his surprise, the Ming soldiers in charge of escorting the prisoners were Shiheng's personal guards. They had actually dared to resist with all their might. Left with no other choice, Gao Xiong decided to kill them and deal with these stubborn soldiers. In the face of modern firearms, these so-called elites and personal guards were no different from paper. After cleaning up the battlefield, Gao Xiong stuffed a bow and arrow into the bullet holes in his body. Still unwilling to give up, he lit a fire to destroy the corpses. After that, Gao Xiong ordered his men to send the Japanese people to the sea. He also told them that it was the mercenaries who helped them this time. Gao Xiong would not let go of this opportunity to express his goodwill. This way, it would be much easier for him to accept Japanese warships in the future. Once this scene was discovered, the news quickly spread back to the capital. At this moment, because of Yang Bao, the ordinary people in the capital also knew that Commander-in-Chief Shi Hang had won a great victory. They were all excitedly discussing it, and their faces were filled with joy. Suddenly, the 12 gates of the capital were closed in advance, and it was announced that Japanese spies had entered the capital and needed to be rounded up. But there was no large-scale roundup. Instead, many great Ming soldiers appeared below the city walls, and the soldiers of the 5 cities' warden's office could be seen everywhere on the streets of the capital. The atmosphere in the capital suddenly became tense. This was all because of Zhu Qiyu's imperial decree. After learning that the Japanese prisoners of war had really been taken away, Zhu Qiyu, who had been worried ever since he became emperor, ordered the defense of the capital to be tightened. At the same time, he ordered horses to leave the city and informed Shi Hang that once the situation in the Tianjin garrison was stabilized, he should return to the capital to take charge of the situation. Shi Hang was the commander-in-chief of the army and was in charge of military affairs. He could be considered a veteran of the battlefield. Without him, Zhu Qiyu truly could not rest easy. The horses galloped through the night and arrived at the Tianjin garrison early the next morning. At this time, Shi Hang's army was preparing breakfast, and it was not yet time to open fire. The commander-in-chief saw the messenger sent by the Bureau of Military Personnel. What? There are still remnants of the Japanese army? They might endanger the safety of the capital? Shi Hang had just put on a jacket and entered the main hall when he heard this shocking news. Yes, venerable commander-in-chief. This is His Majesty's decree. The messenger nodded and took out an imperial decree from his bosom and respectfully presented it to Shi Hang. This was not an imperial decree, but it was a letter written by Zhu Qiyu himself. On it was written that the capital was in danger and that the commander-in-chief should urgently return to the capital to take charge of the defense of the city. The urgency in the tone and sincerity in the words had already molded Shi Hang into a pillar of the country. As Shi Hang read this secret letter from one of the emperor's trusted aides, his heart trembled with excitement. This was the emperor's trust and reliance. He had made a few mistakes, but the emperor had not blamed him and had even spoken with such sincerity. How could he not do his utmost? Since this was the case, there was nothing more to say. He naturally had to return to the capital. As for the defense of the Tianjin garrison, let alone the fact that it seemed stable, even if it was still unstable, he couldn't care less. What could be more important than the emperor's trust? Right now, he wanted nothing more than to grow a pair of wings and fly back. In his urgent mood, Shi Hang ordered the army to quickly eat breakfast. An hour later, the army was to assemble. 2,000 men were to remain in the Tianjin garrison while the rest of the army was to return to the capital to rescue the emperor. Before breakfast was even ready, the order had already been given. The cooks hastily increased their firepower and managed to finish the food. Even so, many of the soldiers still hadn't eaten their fill. After just 2 bites, they set off for the Tianjin garrison, heading straight for the capital. Shi Hang was impatient. He wanted to use this matter to demonstrate his loyalty so that he could obtain the emperor's trust. However, he had neglected one thing, and that was his safety along the way. In other words, the 10,000-some Japanese army that had left the Tianjin harbor had caused Shi Hang to let down his guard. He believed that even if there were any remaining enemies, there wouldn't be too many. As a result, he had only been concerned with the speed of the army and had neglected the proper formation and defense. In order to show Zhu Qiyu his loyalty, Shi Hang had led his 3,000 cavalry ahead of the rest of the army, leaving them far behind as they headed straight for the capital. He was still thinking about how happy the emperor would be when he received the report of the battle early in the morning and was able to enter the capital in the afternoon. Everything he had done would have been worth it. Chapter 295. Shi Heng, who was supposed to be in the center of the army, had become the general of the vanguard. He had repeatedly ordered the infantry to keep up with him, making it difficult for the 30,000 ordinary soldiers. Without horses to ride, how could 2 legs be a match for 4 legs? As a result, the distance between the two sides grew larger and larger. Not only that, but the infantry had also grown longer and longer. Some soldiers had almost reached the corridor while others had just walked out of the Tianjin Guard. This long line of soldiers had far too many weaknesses, so many that Gao Xiong was able to quickly find several massive openings. Now that there was a loophole, it was equivalent to giving the enemy an opportunity. Gao Xiong didn't hold back anymore. Commander Gao, who had already reorganized the army, led the cold front and the auxiliary troops down from the sky. It was as if he had smacked the Ming army's head with a club. At the gates of the capital, the tense-faced Minister of War Yi Ming, head eunuch Chen Guan of the Imperial Horse Directorate, and supervising eunuch Ru Zhu were standing on the city gates, their eyes anxiously looking into the distance. Finally, the dust began to rise, and the distant cavalry could be vaguely seen. "They're here, they're here." When Yi Ming saw the cavalry bearing the banner of the great Ming dynasty appear, his expression relaxed, and his entire body went limp. After an anxious night of waiting, Shi Heng's return finally came. Now, he could finally let go of the burden in his heart. Even if there were any more dangerous situations, there would be someone powerful to take care of it. The 3,000 cavalry led by Shi Heng had truly arrived. Because they had charged at the very front, they had not been harassed, allowing them to safely arrive at the gates of the capital. His arrival was warmly received by the group led by Yi Ming. "Where is His Majesty? What's the situation in the capital?" Shi Heng anxiously asked Yi Ming and the others after dismounting from his horse. Yi Ming could naturally understand Shi Heng's impatience, so he put on an understanding expression and said, "Governor Shi, His Majesty is waiting for you in the palace. Come with me as quickly as possible." The Jianghu Hall of the Imperial Palace. This was one of the 3 main halls of the Forbidden City and the smallest of the 3 halls of the outer court. It was located behind the Taihe Hall. The Jianghu Hall was where the emperor rested and practiced etiquette before going to the Taihe Hall to hold the ceremony. This was the emperor's private place. Being able to receive Shi Heng here was enough to show how much he valued him. As soon as he entered the Hall of Harmony, Shi Heng dropped to his knees with a thud and shouted respectfully, "Long live the emperor. You may rise." Zhu Qiyu's face was full of joy. To be able to rush back so quickly from the Tianjin Guard, Shi Heng's loyalty was evident. With such a loyal minister and a good general, as the emperor, he was able to comfort himself. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Shi Heng stood up. When he raised his head to look at Zhu Qiyu, his eyes were full of concern and self-blame. As if seeing the meaning in Shi Heng's eyes, Zhu Qiyu waved his hand and said, "It's fine. We are fine, the capital is fine, and the officials are fine. Now that you're back, everything is even better." Ha ha ha. A hearty and self-satisfied laughter resounded throughout the entire Hall of Harmony. Following this laughter, a series of hurried footsteps could be heard. Looking toward the sound, it was the head eunuch of the Imperial Horse Directorate, Chen Guan. As one of the heads of the eunuchs in charge of military affairs, there was rarely good news wherever Chen Guan appeared. With Chen Guan's appearance, the smile on Zhu Qiyu's face gradually disappeared. The bad feeling in his heart grew stronger. "Your Majesty, there's an urgent report from the front line. Yang Village." In the study of the inner village, Tiger's Mane delivered a report he had just received to Yang Chendong. After opening it, Dong Shuai's laughter rang out. "Not bad, not bad. In this battle, Gao Xiong captured more than 15,000 Ming soldiers. In total, this Shi Heng has already given us half of the captives. He really is the commander-in-chief of transportation." Tiger's Mane didn't understand what a commander-in-chief of transportation was, but he was clear on one thing. That was, the front line had won another battle. Immediately, he said happily, "That's right. This time, we've captured so many young soldiers. I'm sure the Cold Front's team will be expanded. Expansion is good. But we must pay attention to the quality of the soldiers. How about this? Send an order to Qiqian City and let the instructors there pay attention to increasing the loyalty of the soldiers. Also, the cold front's assessment cannot be the slightest bit careless. It's better to have nothing than to have something substandard. The use of the phrase, "it's better to have nothing than to have something substandard," was enough to show the high standards and strict requirements that Yang Qindong had for the cold front. In Yang Qindong's heart, the cold front had always been the most elite. He wanted to use this army to conquer the world. Since this was the case, they couldn't have too many soldiers. Otherwise, it would be difficult to provide for them even if they had great financial resources. This required them to be few but good. This way, they could use the least amount of effort to leverage the greatest benefits. In reality, ever since the cold front had been established, it had never disappointed Yang Qindong. Just like this time, when they disguised themselves as Japanese soldiers, Gao Xiong had clearly written in the report that the cold front had no casualties. Only 20 or so auxiliary soldiers had died and 300 or so were injured. With less than 400 casualties, they were able to capture more than 25,000 Ming soldiers and take away more than 20,000 civilians near the Tiananwei port. Naturally, part of this was due to Shi Heng taking credit for himself and Zhu Qiyu's careless command. However, Ling Feng's own strength also played an important role. It was because they were the leaders and the core that they were able to achieve victory. This was the meaning of being an elite. On the other hand, if the cold front was mixed with sand and couldn't become the elite of the elite, how could they achieve great things? Therefore, the phrase, "it's better to have nothing than to have something substandard," was extremely appropriate. Tiger's Mane, who had always regarded the sixth young master's words as the truth, immediately agreed and went out to spread the news. After Yang Qindong was left alone in the study, he slowly sat down on a chair. Then, his gaze fell on the map on the wall. It was the location of Japan. Through his gaze, he seemed to have slowly penetrated the map. Not long after, he could see the inspiring scene of a bright five-starred red flag being placed there. In the palace, Chen Guan knelt on the ground and reported that the army was attacked when they returned to the capital and suffered heavy losses. Shi Heng, who was originally excited and waiting to hear the emperor's praise, knelt on the ground with a thud. Then, with a trembling voice, he said, "This subject is guilty, this subject is guilty." He led 30,000 soldiers and lost half of them on the way back. This was indeed a serious crime. If it was any other emperor, he would have been sent to prison. Naturally, Zhu Qiyu was also very angry. However, he knew that Shi Heng couldn't be moved at the moment. Without a general at his disposal, if this person committed a crime, he would face a situation where there would be no general at his disposal in the event of a crisis. Sigh, forget it. Governor Shi was just anxious to save the emperor. Zhu Qiyu was very dissatisfied and then spat out these words. He didn't mention his beloved subject, but directly said that Governor Shi had seen Zhu Qiyu's dissatisfaction. How could Shi Heng not hear it clearly? He knew that he had committed a grave mistake. At once, he kowtowed to the ground again and said, "Your Majesty, this subject requests to atone for his crime by performing meritorious deeds. This subject will definitely find the main force of the Japanese army and fight them to the death. We will rescue the prisoners and show the great Ming dynasty's courage." "Good, since that is the case, I will allow you to atone for your crime and perform meritorious deeds. I hope that this time, you can bring me good news. Go." Zhu Qiyu, who was somewhat disheartened and disappointed, forced himself to be spirited and said. However, he was actually very depressed. Why was it that after he became the emperor, things kept happening one after another? Moreover, there was nothing that went his way. This time, the new army had suffered such heavy losses. He was afraid that it would take some time for them to recover, right? What if he hadn't chosen Shi Heng to be the general and had instead chosen Yang Qindong to be the commander-in-chief? Would there have been a different ending? However, just as he thought of this, Zhu Qiyu shook his head and rejected the idea. Yang Qindong's thoughts were difficult to deal with. No matter what, he couldn't give too much power to a subject that he couldn't completely trust. Otherwise, he would be unable to eat or sleep in peace. If that really happened, he would be reaping what he had sown. Shiheng left the palace and searched for the whereabouts of the main force of the Japanese army with Minister of War Yi Ming and Imperial Horse Directorate head eunuch Chen Guan. However, before they could investigate anything, news came from the Tianjin Ministry of Defense. It said that a large number of Japanese troops had suddenly entered the Tianjin port and left by boat. A rough estimate put the number of troops at around 30 to 40,000. Where did so many Japanese troops come from? After hearing the news, Minister Yi Ming's face was filled with shock. He didn't think that those people were actually his own soldiers who had been captured. However, the shock only flashed across Shiheng's face for a moment. Then, he said excitedly, "Good, so many enemies have left. This time, there shouldn't be many Japanese troops left in our great Ming dynasty. I suggest that we immediately send people to secretly investigate their whereabouts. Once they are found, the army will surround and suppress them. No matter what, they can't be allowed to cause any more trouble." Agreed. Minister of War Yi Ming and Imperial Horse Directorate head eunuch Chen Guan both nodded in agreement. After the three of them reached a consensus, the secret agents in the army, the spies from the Ministry of War, and the experts from the Eastern Faction Guards and the embroidered uniform guards all quietly left the city and began to search for traces of the Japanese army. However, at this moment, Gao Xiong had already left with the main force and the captives through the Tianjin port. However, Nia Tong's figure was no longer on the boat. He was left behind, along with 2 companies of Cold Front's elites. They were following the 6th young master's orders and continuing to stir up trouble in the Great Ming dynasty. In short, they couldn't let Shiheng and the others rest, and they definitely couldn't give them enough time or opportunity to train a new army. Moreover, as long as there was an external threat, no one would pay attention to them. If there was a critical moment, Nia Tong could still lead the 200 Cold Front elites into the capital to ensure the safety of the 6th young master. Chapter 296. It was precisely because Nia Tong had left the Cold Front with only 200 elites in the area between Tientsin and the capital that they were so capable and vigilant that it was very difficult for anyone to discover their whereabouts. Even if a few lucky spies ran into them, they would be immediately detained and would have no chance to send out any information. In order to achieve the goal of harming the capital, Nia Tong would occasionally bring people out to flaunt their might. For example, they would rob a passing official's caravan or rob a few officials returning to the capital. This caused the entire region to be jittery and the officials and nobles to complain. Batch after batch of spies and even cavalry were sent out, greatly affecting Shiheng's energy and making it impossible for him to fully devote himself to the matter of forming and training a new army. As a result, before Yang Qindong ordered Nia Tong to stop, the Great Ming military had a lot of energy tied up in this area. The matter of the Japanese army entering the capital caused a lot of discussion among the common people. First, there was Yang Bao's unbridled report. The news of the Great Ming army's great victory was first spread out, but then there was the news of the Great Ming army losing soldiers and generals. This clear contrast between before and after, the result of giving hope and then disappointing, caused the common people to curse. If there wasn't any good news from the start, the common people wouldn't have such a big opinion. After all, if there was no hope, there would naturally be no disappointment. But now, the incompetence of the army was vividly displayed, so it was no wonder that the common people would have opinions. And the direct result of this opinion was that there were fewer and fewer able-bodied men volunteering to join the army. As a result, there was a serious shortage of soldiers in the later period. The Ministry of War had no choice but to issue official documents and begin to actively recruit soldiers. Anyone who had a strong laborer and their family would be conscripted. This kind of forceful recruitment of able-bodied men naturally caused a lot of chaos. On the streets, one could see able-bodied men being forcibly taken away. For a moment, the entire capital was shrouded in dark clouds. Because of this matter, countless imperial censors wrote to impeach the Ministry of War, believing that their actions had affected the development and stability of society. The memorial was sent to Emperor Zhu Qiu's desk, leaving the young emperor somewhat helpless. Since he came to power, the Great Ming dynasty was no longer as strong as it used to be. After successive defeats, the hereditary military families were unable to provide fresh blood in a short period of time. It was inevitable that ordinary people would be recruited into the army. Fortunately, with Yang Qindong's reputation as the god of war, many people signed up to join the army. Many of the ambitious scholars also threw away their brushes and joined the army. The situation seemed to be good, but after Shihang's defeat this time, only half of the 50,000 men he had brought out of the city returned. For this reason, many clans had been shattered, and many families had to send off their black hair. In the capital, 1 or 2 of the 100 households had white cloth hanging from their robes. Such a tragic scene naturally caused the enthusiasm of the soldiers to decrease greatly. In order to ensure the stability of the soldiers, and to ensure the safety of the capital and the imperial power, the people below could not recruit by force. Zhu Qiyu was very clear about this matter. Shihang had even specially reported this matter to the Minister of War, Ming, and mentioned some of the subsequent plans, some of which were to his liking. As a result, Zhu Qiyu naturally ignored the memorials from the imperial censors and threw them all to the side. The incident of the Japanese army had caused the situation in the capital to become turbulent, and the people were divided. Yang Qindong had played this move brilliantly. While the people in the capital were talking about it and mourning, the Duke of Loyalty had set his eyes on the southern part of the great Ming dynasty, Guangdong. Based on the knowledge obtained from the history books, the chaos in Guangdong was brewing. The Security Bureau had already sent people there, and the news they sent back was that the king of Shunping was preparing for an uprising. This was one of Yang Qindong's advantages. He was able to know what historical event was going to happen in advance. Fortunately, the heavens were not unkind to him, and many things did not change. Since he knew about this news in advance, he should have made preparations. This was an opportunity for him. The streets of the capital had been in chaos recently. For the sake of the soldiers, the Ministry of War and the military office of the 5 cities did not have any leaders. All the young men of the right age and without any family resources were targeted. They were often taken away on the street and sent to the barracks. More and more people were crying out for justice in front of the Supreme Court. They were all women who had lost their sons and husbands. However, no matter how miserable the situation was, it was difficult to change the fact that the men and their families were taken away. There were policies at the top and countermeasures at the bottom. More and more people chose to hide. They either hid the men and their families, and every day the women would come out to buy rice and noodles, or they thought of ways to send the men out of the city to prevent the soldiers from breaking in at any time. In this way, it also helped some influential people with power and background. There was a need for strong male servants to guard the courtyard, and there was a need for strong male servants to work in the business. In the past, these jobs that didn't pay much were usually done by people over the age of 30. But now, they had all become popular goods. Even if the pay was very little, there would still be many people who would fill the gap. The Ming dynasty's corruption was evident from this. In the Great Ming Dynasty, there were always some people who had special privileges. For example, there were noble young masters who came from good families, or there were merchants who relied on powerful families and had good family resources, or there were scholars who passed the county-level examinations. Often, these people were either rich or famous, and the soldiers were not willing to offend them. It was precisely because of their status that they naturally became a privileged class. This conscription event had also allowed them to obtain countless benefits. Soon, there was even a special business, which was to escort those strong men out of the capital. As a reward, each person received a huge sum of money. It was not that some ordinary families with no money or power did not give them a chance. They would send the men out and sell the women. After signing a contract of 5 or 10 years, they would be able to ensure that the men and the family could safely leave the city. In this background where men were superior to women, men were like the heavens. It seemed that as long as they existed, the family would still exist, and it would be filled with hope. As a result, more and more women sold themselves. There were even some who directly sold their daughters, regardless of how naive they were. They should have been at a carefree age. This chaotic scene made the lives of the people of the capital extremely cheap for a time. Even ordinary households who couldn't afford to buy a servant girl could buy one or two at a low price, so that they could enjoy being the master of the household and take on the airs of a master. Outside the Yang family manor, a carriage drove back, followed by a squad of mercenaries wearing camouflage uniforms. But compared to before, there were a few girls who were only 12 or 13 years old or younger in the group. They all had tears in their eyes, and their faces were full of grievances and reluctance, as if they had just experienced some hardships. Even their eyes were less lively and more lethargic. "Hello, Madame Shui." Ling Feng, who was guarding the outer courtyard of the Yang family manor, saw that the third madam had returned and hurriedly saluted. Then he looked curiously at the 6 or 7 little girls in the group, puzzled. Soon, the carriage arrived at the inner courtyard. As soon as the carriage stopped, Xiao Yushue, who was dressed in snow white, hurried out of the carriage and asked Ling Feng, who was guarding here, "Where are the first madam and the second madam?" "Third madam, they are watching fish in the backyard," Ling Feng replied in a respectful tone. As soon as he finished speaking, Madame Shui floated past him like a gust of wind. It seemed that she knew some kind of lightness skill that allowed her to fly on water. In the pond in the backyard, bright red koi fish were swimming at the bottom of the pond. Their every move could be seen through the clear water of the pond. When 2 koi fish met, they would make a small splash, which made Hu Yan and Xiao Yin, who were watching from the side, exclaim in joy. Spring was about to pass, and summer was coming. The weather was gradually getting hotter. Yang Qindong ordered some people to catch some koi fish in the pond for the madams to enjoy. Unlike Madame Shui and Madame Xiang, Hu Yan and Xiao Yin had not found what they wanted to do until now. Usually, they took turns to take care of the household. Occasionally, Hu Yan would give lessons to the servants in the manor, teaching them how to read and write. After all, she was Hu Zhao's granddaughter, so she was quite knowledgeable. However, the manor was not very big, and there were not many people. Even if she taught them something, it would not take too long. As for taking care of people, there were rules, and everyone was very self-disciplined, so there was really nothing to teach them. As for career, it was not as if the 2 women had not discussed this issue. Second Madame Xiao Yin had also thought about it. Since childhood, she was used to following the 6th young master. As long as she could stay by his side, she did not have any other skills. Taking care of the young master's basic necessities of life was enough. Originally, Hu Yan also wanted to talk about the matter of taking care of the household. However, after a long time of contact, her relationship with Xiao Yin was very good. In addition, this woman never fought for anything, so as the first madam, she naturally could not talk about the matter of taking care of the household. Later, she thought about how she had read some sages' books, so she thought that if possible, she could go to the academy to help. It could be seen that although the Yang family's academy was not large, 6th young master was still very attentive. He even took the initiative to take on the responsibility of being the head of the mountain. Logically speaking, with Yang Qindong's current status, he could have invited a great scholar to take on this position, and it would have been better for the outside world. However, he did not do that, but took on the heavy responsibility, which showed how much importance he attached to it. For this matter, Hu Yan had also mentioned it to Yang Qindong. In this regard, the 6th young master naturally did not care about it. With his wealth, it was naturally not a problem to support the madams, but if they wanted to do something, he would certainly support them. People always had to have something to do. This was not to make a living, but to pass the time. Chapter 297. As a result, Hu Yan became a lecturer in the Yang Academy. Every 7 days, she would give a lecture on etiquette, which was one of her specialties. As the granddaughter of the current Minister of Rights, she had learned a thing or two about etiquette from a young age. Today, there was no class, so the 2 girls invited each other to the garden to look at the fish. While they were enjoying the view, a white figure dashed into the courtyard. Who else could it be but Madame Shui? Slow down. How can you run so fast like the third madam? Hu Yan chuckled at the sight of Madame Shui rushing over like the wind. Sisters, you're so infuriating. Madame Shui knew that Hu Yan was joking, so she did not take it to heart. Instead, she angrily sat down at the round table and told them what she had seen and heard in the capital today. As one of the famous courtesans in the capital, Madame Shui was gentle and had seen much of the world. She could easily solve some difficult problems if they were placed in front of her. Ever since she became the third Madam of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, her reputation and status had skyrocketed. Very few people dared to provoke her. No one knew what could make her so angry. What happened? Why is third younger sister so unhappy? Hu Yan asked curiously. Although Qiao Yin did not say anything, her eyes said the same thing. It's like this. Madame Shui told them roughly what had happened in the capital in a sullen voice. According to her, the streets and alleys of the capital were filled with women being sold, and there were even some old women who were nearly 50 years old selling themselves on the streets. They had hired scholars from some place to write down their specialties, such as how good they were at cooking, how skilled they were at needlework, or how nimble they were at cleaning the house. They did this so that they could sell themselves better. Along the way, the status of women was so miserable. This was the opposite of what her husband had said about men and women being equal and that they could contribute to society as long as they worked hard. As a woman, Madame Shui, who now had a high social status, could not bear to see such a thing happen in front of her. Is that so? Is it caused by the imperial court's conscription? Hu Yan was indeed smart. Although Xiao Yuxue had not said the reason, she had already guessed the reason. On the other hand, Qiao Yin was still puzzled. Even if it's conscription, aren't there military households? They could have gathered people from around the capital, so why did they have to capture people from the capital? This was the capital of the great Ming Dynasty, under the feet of the Son of Heaven. With such a mess, aren't you afraid that the imperial censors will impeach you? Aren't you afraid that the people will be upset? Scared? Of course I'm scared. Hu Yan's eyes seemed to spew flames of fury as she said, it's precisely because we're afraid that we're capturing people from the capital. This is because the soldiers' families are essentially in the capital, which means that the imperial court has something on them. In the future, no one will dare to refuse to do anything they're ordered to do. I see. Understanding the reason, Qiao Yin nodded lightly. But soon after, she said somewhat indignantly, but threatening someone like this is the conduct of a gentleman. Aren't you afraid that the greater the pressure, the greater the backlash? My husband often says that the one who wins the hearts of the people will win the world. If we continue to do so, we will eventually lose the hearts of the people. Gentlemen? How could there be a gentleman in the court? Otherwise, why wouldn't my husband be willing to go to court and coexist with those officials? Some people always talk about righteousness, benevolence, righteousness, and morality, but they always do things that are beneficial to themselves first. Madame Snow also interjected angrily. Then, she suddenly thought of something and hurriedly looked apologetically at Hu Yan. Big sister, that's not what Yushua meant, it's fine. Hu Yan shook her head with a magnanimous smile. She knew that even her grandfather and father sometimes had to do things and say things that went against their will in the court. This was the result of the environment and could not be changed by a single person. As if Madame Shui's criticism of those officials had implicated first Madame Hu Yan, the atmosphere in the rear garden became rather awkward. Sensing this, Qiao Yin hurriedly interjected, that's right. Since there are so many women selling themselves, have any of them been sold? Of course. Now that they were on the topic of business, Madame Shui regained her earlier excitement and continued, with so many people selling themselves, the price naturally became very low. Some of them were sold. But comparatively speaking, there are still many more who haven't been sold. I discussed it with fourth sister, Madame Xiang, and the immortal abode accepted 50, but it was still a drop in the bucket. On my way back to the manor, I couldn't help but accept 7 more women. I've already brought them to the manor. Please punish me for making such a decision without permission. Madame Shui sincerely expressed her apologies. This wasn't because of his status that she was afraid of. In fact, it was out of respect. You've done well. There's no need to punish you. In my opinion, the number of people recruited is still too small. It should be more. After Hu Yan heard this, she didn't have the slightest intention of blaming him. On the contrary, she spoke with a supportive attitude. That's right. Big sister and third sister are right. We should do more good deeds like this. Since we have the ability, we should save one more person. So be it. Beta Persei was tall and powerful, and his attacks were ruthless. Sometimes, even Tiger's mane was on par with him. It was just that his martial arts were extraordinary, and when he spoke, he wasn't very powerful. When he was asked by the sixth young master, he huffed for a long time and couldn't say anything. Call Tiger's mane over. Yang Chendong didn't get an answer from Beta Persei, so he thought of the nimble Tiger's mane. Tiger's mane was called away by the first madam. This time, Beta Persei's answer was straightforward. Oh. Yang Chendong lightly nodded. Tiger's mane was someone by his side, and usually, he didn't listen to him. Usually, even if Hu Yan had something to do, he wouldn't be called. But now that he was being used, it was enough to prove that things must be too busy. Even so, Yang Chendong didn't ask any more questions and went straight to the inner courtyard. He wanted to see for himself what Hu Yan was doing. Also, where did these women come from? What were they going to do? In the inner courtyard of the Yang family manor, Hu Yan took a sip of tea and after slightly quenching her thirst, she continued to speak to Tiger's mane. I'll leave the arrangements for these people to you. When my husband asks, I'll tell him. What are you talking about? Yang Chendong just walked in at this time and immediately asked in a loud voice. Young master. Hearing Yang Chendong's voice from behind, Tiger's mane quickly turned around and bowed respectfully. In response, Yang Chendong waved his sleeves and said, What's the hurry? This. Tiger's mane didn't know how to answer in front of Hu Yan, so he hesitated. However, the first Madam Hu Yan, second Madam Qiao Yin, third Madam Shui, and seventh Madam Yang Duo all stood up at the same time. Hu Yan took the lead to answer, Sixth young master, I'm instructing Tiger's mane to settle the women I bought. Women you bought? Yang Chendong repeated with some confusion. Yes, the situation is like this. In the following time, Hu Yan roughly explained the situation in the capital. In the end, she mentioned that she, several sisters, and seventh Madam Yang Duo couldn't bear it and bought 800 women. Chapter 298. Yang Chendong naturally knew about the chaos caused by the conscription of soldiers in the capital. At that time, he thought that he was shooting himself in the foot. Heng's idea wasn't wrong. Using the able-bodied men of the capital with their families would naturally guarantee their loyalty. It was also because of this that Zhu Qiyu allowed the conscription of soldiers. However, they didn't think that there were pros and cons to this. Didn't they know that a forcefully picked melon wasn't sweet? Wouldn't such a forceful act of breaking up families incur a backlash of anger? Besides, with the Great Ming's culture of emphasizing culture and suppressing military force, how much could the salary of the soldiers be? If the able-bodied men joined the army, did they consider how the women and their families would live? If the women lost their livelihood and starved, how could they serve their masters wholeheartedly? How could there not be chaos? This was clearly Heng's short-sightedness, and he would eventually pay the price for it. However, he didn't expect that the women would sell themselves as slaves or maids. He also didn't expect that the madams would suddenly make a move. In just a day, they had bought 800 men. Although this was only a drop in the ocean compared to the 50,000 able-bodied men that he wanted to capture, if his calculations were correct, this was only the beginning and far from the end. He hated Heng's lack of foresight. Rather than thinking about how to increase the loyalty of these soldiers, it would be better to think about how to improve the treatment of these soldiers. As long as the salaries were sufficient, the military households and guard stations around the capital wouldn't be so empty. Speaking of which, this had a lot to do with Yang Chendong's actions. If he hadn't changed history and saved Zhu Qizhen on the battlefield, the Great Ming Dynasty wouldn't have been divided into two. Even if those soldiers didn't want to do anything, they wouldn't know where to escape to. But now, Ingzong's substitute sect had two places to choose from, giving these military households another choice. The Security Bureau had already sent news that many of the soldiers in the north who had been recorded had gone to the south and sought refuge in Ingzong's land because of the unfair treatment. In that place, they could be re-registered and acquitted, and they would even be treated better. In this way, Shiheng naturally felt that he had no soldiers to recruit, so he was forced to beat up these able-bodied men of the capital. It was recorded in history that during the Ming Dynasty, there were more than 1.5 million troops stationed there, and at the peak of development, there were more than 2 million. From this, it could be seen that the military system was still very complete. This also made it so that the Great Ming Dynasty did not have to worry too much about military resources. But now, under the rule of one country and two emperors, the military could run around at any time without suffering any punishment, which led to all kinds of unexpected situations. This accident eventually implicated Yang Chendong, who had changed everything. When he looked at the 800 women in the manor, it would be a lie to say that he didn't have a headache. Of course, if these women appeared in Crimson City, there would be no problem in settling them down. Whether it was a garment factory, a paper factory, or a glass factory, they could all be easily arranged. And these people were simply not enough. But in the capital, in the Yang family manor, there were simply too many people. Hu Yan and the others were doing a good deed, so Yang Chendong could not refuse. After all, these were Han people. Even if the madams did not help, Yang Chendong would not leave them in the lurch. Then the problem now was, how should he settle them down? 800 mouths, and this was only the first day. This number might double tomorrow. As for what it would be like in the end, Yang Chendong did not dare to think about it. If these people all relied on him, even if he was rich and overbearing, he would still feel strained eventually. Of course, the most important reason was not to raise idle people, and not to let others develop the habit of eating and being lazy. This was the most important reason. Yang Chendong stood there and thought for a long time. Hu Yan saw that her husband's expression seemed to be a little uncertain, so she asked softly, "Lu Lang, did I do something wrong?" "It doesn't matter, I can save my own expenses." "No." Yang Chendong drew a long arc at the corner of his mouth and said with a smile, "How could Yan be wrong? This was originally a good deed. I was just thinking about how to settle them down and give them a way out." Hearing that Yang Chendong did not mean to be angry, Hu Yan's expression immediately became much brighter. "Yes, this is a good deed. Lu Lang doesn't know that if these women were sold to other families, they would probably suffer a lot. As long as they come to us, they will not be bullied. Also, Lu Lang is the best. He will definitely think of a good way to solve this problem." "Yes, Lu Lang will think of a way." Yang Chendong agreed with a smile. But the following night, he had a headache. In the first half of the night, he energetically cleaned up Hu Yan, Xiao Yin, and Madame Shui. Perhaps they thought that it was a mistake to buy 800 women without asking for permission, so they worked extra hard that night. But in front of Yang Chendong, they were still defeated. In the second half of the night, Yang Chendong returned to his study and sat there until daybreak. His body had always been in good condition, especially after coming back to this world. Sometimes, he even wondered if his body had undergone some sort of transformation. Even if he didn't sleep at all, he could still do what he was supposed to do the next day without feeling too tired. In the middle of the night, Yang Chendong finally came up with a few countermeasures. First, he could rely on himself. Give these women a certain amount of money and let them do what they liked, but they would have to pay a certain amount of money to the Yang clan every month. This was the art of teaching people how to fish. Second, he could hire them. He would have them become members of the Yang clan. Then, he would have them work for him, arranging what they could do based on their strengths. After that, he would give them money every month. As for what they could do, for example, he could expand the immortal abode. He could open 2 branches in different parts of the capital. After all, there was only one immortal abode, and it would be inconvenient for people who lived too far away to have a meal. When the time was right, he could even arrange for them to open branches in other cities. This required a lot of manpower, and it was especially suitable for women. In addition, the Yang Clan Bank and the Heavens Beyond Trading Company also required a lot of cleaning, so he could arrange for some people to do the same. Third, he could transfer them to Crimson City. As he said before, Crimson City was growing by the day. It was precisely for this reason that the rapid development of the city had led to a shortage of manpower. The addition of these women would greatly alleviate this problem. Fourth, he could choose a few people to become his students. He could choose a few young and clever ones to enter the Yang Clan Academy to study. As the Yang Clan grew stronger and stronger, it would naturally require more and more professionals. While he still had some free time, he could teach a few more students. Even if he didn't have the time, he could have his students teach him. If he did well, these people would be loyal and useful, and they would be of great help to him in the future. With these 4 methods, it wouldn't be a problem to take care of the livelihoods of several thousand women. The only difference was that it would depend on what choice they would make. With these 4 methods, Yang Chendong spoke of his idea during breakfast the next day. The only difference was that the third method was to arrange for them to work in another city. He even said that he was preparing to expand his business to the south, and those women would be sent to the south as well. Hu Yan and the other women had always trusted Yang Chendong without any reservations. Reality had proven that whenever he did something, he would never make a mistake. Hearing that there was a solution to the problem, they naturally agreed without much consideration. Then, they began to chatter about how they would go to the city to save more women after breakfast. In the capital, because of the matter of conscription, tens of thousands of able-bodied men were captured, and the direct result was that even more women were forced to sell their bodies. Some of them truly didn't know how to live without men. This was naturally a habit formed by the superiority of men over women. The women were busy with the household chores, and without a man, they didn't know what to do. Even the most basic of scheming was difficult for them. There were also some who originally had some ability, and their men had not been captured. They had sacrificed themselves for several years, perhaps even longer, just so that they could sell a few taels of silver so that their husbands could leave the capital with enough money for their travels. But no matter what the reason was, on both sides of the street, there were women selling their bodies. This scene was seen clearly by the officials participating in the morning court session. The soft-hearted sighed, the hard-hearted turned a blind eye, and there were also some righteous people who thought about how to express their views on this matter in the morning court session, to see if they could persuade the emperor not to conscript soldiers in the capital. But no matter what they thought, there weren't many officials who truly wanted to resolve this matter. Firstly, their conditions were limited. Even if they wanted to help, they couldn't help too many people. Secondly, no one wanted to be the first to stand out. Many of their colleagues and officials didn't help. If you acted first, it would show that you were capable. This was the easiest way to make others feel annoyed, and it was very likely that you would be isolated and ostracized. And the more there was no one to help, the more unusual the actions of Hu Yan and the other women were. Yesterday, when these women wanted to save a few more people, they also made some selections, such as good-looking, young, and healthy. But today, they simply pointed at a large group. For example, they recruited all the people on this street, and there were hundreds of them at once. Hu Yan and the others didn't even blink their eyes. In the imperial court, as Zhu Qiyu sat on the dragon throne that showed the dignity of the emperor, a day's court session began. The first to report was naturally the commander-in-chief, Shi Heng, the Marquis of Wuxia. He first reported to the emperor about the recent situation of the recruitment, saying that everything was going well. Then, the Minister of War, Ming, stood up, saying that the new recruits had been registered, and there were some good seedlings, healthy, young, and strong soldiers, and so on. He also said that if everything went well, the army could be basically formed in a year or 3 months for the emperor to use. Chapter 299. Hearing this, Zhu Qiyu's face lit up with joy. Although the great Ming dynasty emphasized culture and suppressed military might had always been indispensable. In other words, with enough military power, he, the emperor, would have more confidence when he spoke. After reporting the important matters, some censors stepped forward to impeach Shiheng. The general idea was that the conscription of soldiers in the capital had caused the people to suffer, that women who could not survive could be seen on the streets, and that it was true that families were broken and people were dead. Two censors stepped forward one after another. Their expressions were solemn, and they even looked like they were going to reprimand Wang Chong to death. Since ancient times, it was a glorious thing for civil officials to die because of reprimands, and for military officials to die in battle, as if they could leave their names in history. The moment the censors stepped forward, Zhu Qiyu's face was filled with displeasure. He even glanced at censor of the right, Chen Yi, more than once. In response, this official in charge of the censorate lowered his head. Who didn't know that the imperial censor only had the right to hear rumors and speak? Furthermore, what he said was true and what he saw with his own eyes. How could he stop the imperial censor? The two censors were still speaking aggressively. The general idea was that if this continued, the capital would fall into chaos, and the people would be in an uproar. This would be detrimental to the country, and so on. Those who wanted to do great things did not care about trifles. Zhu Qiyu reminded himself like this. In order to have a strong and reliable army in a short period of time, what did it matter if he sacrificed a few families? Once he had enough strength, defeated his imperial brother Zhu Qizhen, and reunited the great Ming dynasty, who would care about what he had done? They would probably all sing his praises. Have you found the main force of the Japanese army stranded between the capital and the Tianjin Guard? Ignoring the two censors' advice, Zhu Qiyu changed the topic and asked about other matters. Since Zhu Qiyu had privately approved of it, the censors' words were naturally useless. Compared to the officials in the imperial court arguing and even acting, the methods of Hu Yan and the other women were much more effective. In just one morning, 1,200 women of different ages were sent to the Yang village, which was 15 li south of the city. News of this matter spread through the capital like a gust of wind, to every corner of the capital. For a moment, there were all kinds of comments. However, it was clear that there were more praises. Many people said that the Duke of Loyalty and Courage was the reincarnation of Buddha, who had come to deliver all living beings from torment. There were also some people who said that Hu Yan and the other girls were the reincarnations of living bodhisattvas, who had come to save people from calamity. Commoners were like that. Whoever treated them well, they would praise that person. They would not mix in more benefits and motives. Thus, in a short period of time, the virtuous name of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage in the East once more spread throughout the capital. The commoners were happy. They even hoped that there would be more good people like this. But for some people, they wouldn't think that way. Blackwell Street. It was a street that looked a little dirty and chaotic. In reality, this place was exactly the same as what he had seen. Not only was the exterior extremely dirty and messy, the interior was even more horribly chaotic. This street near the western gate of the outer city was the darkest and most violent place in the capital. At least 60% of the city's hooligans and Jianghu people lived here. Everywhere, there was white and there was black. As for the existence of the so-called evil forces, it was not uncommon to see them in the past dynasties, and they could not be stopped despite repeated prohibitions. It seemed that in history, except for the great people who had cracked down on prostitution, gambling, and drugs at the beginning of the country, these dark things existed everywhere. Blackwell Street was a place where all these dark sides were gathered together. Jianghu people were everywhere here. Many criminals wanted by the government were also hiding here. Most of them had several murder cases on their backs. It was precisely because there were so many of them that the scene of people dying on the street would often play out if there was a disagreement. Not far from Blackwell Street was the Baiyun Temple. A little further south was the Guangning Gate. The interconnected traffic made the environment even more complicated. It was precisely because of this that the officers and soldiers had tried to clean up the place several times, but they were not able to completely clean it up. Once the commotion died down, these people would refocus here not long after. And as revenge, the officers who had led soldiers to attack this place would suffer varying degrees of casualties. Over time, there were very few people who cared about this place. Fortunately, these forces would not casually walk out. As long as the influential officials did not provoke them, they would not be implicated. So long as this place existed, it would be fine as long as it did not interfere with their affairs. It was precisely because of this idea of sweeping the snow before the wind that these forces became even more active. And this time, when the news of the women selling themselves came out, they directly came out and either bought them cheaply or threatened them. In just 2 days, they managed to snatch more than 1,000 women. Because there were too many women selling themselves this time, it was difficult for them to attract the attention of others even if they took action. Even if they did notice, no one would really care about them. After all, if these women were not digested through various methods, it was likely that they would starve to death. But their mistake was that they actually dared to snatch the women from Second Madame Xiao Yin. Old Mountain Street. Like its name, it was an old street that had existed for several hundred years. But because of its long history, the layout of this place was rather messy. There were houses built everywhere. Over time, it became a symbol of filth and disarray. The rich gradually moved away, leaving behind some poor people. Because of the poverty, the two sides of the street became a place for women to sell themselves. They squatted neatly on both sides of the street, waiting for a suitable future master to appear. When Xiao Yin heard the news, she brought her people here. When she saw that there were at least 300 women waiting to be sold, how could she be polite? She waved her hand and said that she was selling them all. She had them come to her place to register. Then, she gave them the money and signed the contract to sell themselves. This was already the 3rd time Xiao Yin had done this. She had done it twice in the morning and saved over 200 women. This time, there were slightly more people, so it was likely that this would be the last transaction for the day. The 300 people lined up one by one. It was not that fast, but it was still possible to complete the transaction in an afternoon. But just as these women were lining up, a group of fiendish men suddenly appeared behind them. It was only the weather of May. All of them were topless, holding swords, spears, clubs, and other weapons that could kill people as they walked over in such a brazen manner. It's people from Blackwell Street. As soon as they appeared, a woman who was familiar with the situation cried out in alarm and quickly ran towards Xiao Yin. The originally orderly formation instantly became chaotic. What's going on? Xiao Yin's beautiful eyes narrowed when she saw that the originally orderly line had suddenly become so chaotic. The leader of the guards accompanying them was Jianghu. When the people on the other side appeared, a member of the security bureau approached and said something to him. He strode over to Xiao Yin and said, "Second Madam, the people on the other side are the bullies of Blackwell Street. Their leader is called Qi Lu. He's vicious and merciless. You should return to the sedan and avoid him. Leave this place to us. Don't cause trouble." Xiao Yin knew how powerful Yang Wu and the others were. She wasn't afraid of the people on the other side, but she didn't want to cause trouble for the young master. Yang Wu understands. At that moment, Xiao Yin returned to the sedan accompanied by a few maids. Yang Wu left 4 cold blade guards behind to protect her while he led the other 6 guards to welcome Qi Lu. Qi Lu Kang was tall and sturdy, with a fierce expression on his face. He held a demon-headed blade in his hand. The blade was heavy and the back of the blade was pressed against his exposed shoulder. He looked fierce and fiendish, revealing a mouthful of large black teeth. He walked over with large strides and stopped 10 steps away from Yang Wu. Yang Wu and the 6 men from Langfeng also came to a stop. They first sized up the other party, then cupped their fists and said, "I am Yang Wu from the Yang family manor. Are you 3rd Master Qi? I've heard so much about you." After Yang family manor's name was announced, Qi Lu's gaze didn't change much. His gaze was still condescending. "Heh, since you know my name, you still dare to appear here. It shows that you have some guts. Yang family manor, right? It's the land of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. Fine, since that's the case, I won't bicker with you about your impudence. How about this, you can quickly leave." Qi Lu pointed his right index finger at Yang Wu and the others. After saying this, he laughed heartily. The dozen or so brothers beside him also laughed heartily. In this situation, there was no doubt that he was a bad person. If it was anyone else, it would be hard for them not to be afraid when they saw this scene. However, when it came to Yang Wu, who was accompanied by 6 Ling Feng elites, such a small scene was nothing in his eyes. Seeing that Qi Lu was still laughing heartily, Yang Wu stretched his back and said with an indifferent expression, "Since you know who we are, you still want to leave? You want us to leave? Isn't that embarrassing? You." Yang Wu originally thought that he had already left some face for the other party, but who knew that the other party would refuse a toast? Qi Lu had heard of the name of the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. However, he wasn't in the capital at that time. After more than a year, when he came back, he heard about the East Marshal and the Duke of Loyalty and Courage. A duke was indeed scary, but to people like them who lived on the edge of a blade every day, there was no tomorrow. Generally, there was nothing that could scare them. Not to mention, those who had a duke title in his eyes were usually people who had made some contributions but were outside of his authority. Thus, he didn't put them in his eyes. Chapter 300. Rather than saying that he was giving face to the Duke of Loyalty and Courage, it would be better to say that he was giving face to the Emperor. He didn't want to make a big fuss. However, he had already given them a way out, but they didn't want it, so they couldn't blame him. As far as Qi Lu was concerned, the only people who could make him obediently give face to were his eldest brother and second brother. As for other people, even if it was the Emperor, he wouldn't put them in his eyes. It was because of this arrogance that after hearing Yang Wu's words, his expression changed. Then, he looked up to the sky and laughed arrogantly. "Good, good. It's been a long time since someone dared to speak to me, Third Master Qi, like that." "Right, what did you say just now? You want face, right? Actually, I want to give it to you, but you need to have the ability to do so. I, Third Master Qi, don't play with words. I want to see your strength." Facing Qi Lu's provocation, Yang Wu's face didn't show the slightest fear. What a coincidence. I also don't like to use words to solve problems. This was a clear indication that a big battle was unavoidable. Feeling that the atmosphere wasn't right, the women surrounded Xiao Yin's carriage. Compared to the fierce appearance of Qi Lu and the others, Xiao Yin's appearance was as cute as a reincarnated bodhisattva. Yang Wu's fearlessness ignited the anger in Qi Lu's heart. At this moment, his eyes were wide open. His left hand, which had been idle all this time, casually waved. The dozen or so subordinates behind him shouted in unison and followed his footsteps, pressing forward step by step. "Tsang Lang." Yang Wu immediately pulled out the tri-edged bayonet from his waist. At the same time, his left hand lightly flipped and a flame suddenly soared into the sky. That was the firework he always carried with him. Once something happened, it would soar into the sky. When the nearby Leng Feng heard the news, he would immediately send reinforcements. The 6th young master had said this more than once. Although everyone only had one life, the lives of the people around him were more precious than others. Thus, if he could avoid danger, then he shouldn't. As for things like capsizing in a ditch, that was even more unlikely to happen. If it was only himself, Yang Wu might not have sounded the alarms so early. However, behind him was second Madam. Even if it wasn't for himself, he had to be more careful for Madam. When the fireworks were released, the coldness in Qi Lu's eyes intensified. He could tell that the other party was asking for help, but this could also prove that it was a sign of fear. Not to mention, he was confident that he could defeat the 7 people in front of him within a few moves. The dozen or so people who came with them were all criminals with murder cases on their backs. How could they be scared by a few servants and soldiers? A cold smile flashed across his face as the ghost head blade on his shoulder appeared in his right hand. Following that, Qi Lu ran forward at lightning speed, leaving behind footprints in his footsteps. Along with the rise and fall of his huge body, it seemed that every time his feet landed on the ground, there would be a loud thud. Qi Lu moved, and Jianghu also brandished his tri-edged bayonet, which was shining with a cold light, and rushed forward. At this moment, the 6 Ling Feng elites behind him also pulled out their triangular bayonets and did the same. The two groups of people were like two whirlwinds that rapidly approached each other, stirring up clouds of dust on the sandy ground. Then, the two sides collided like two mad bulls. The sound of weapons clashing could be heard. In the sedan, Xiao Yin's expression was somewhat nervous. She was the one who understood young master's strength the most among the girls. She had even seen the young master's elegant demeanor when he defeated Walla's army from the tower. However, it was the first time she saw a real battle with real swords and real spears. In the end, she was a woman. Fear was inevitable. The more afraid she was, the more she wanted to see what was going on. However, because of the dust, everything became unknown. 30 breaths of time passed. A minute passed. At this moment, the sound of someone falling to the ground could be heard. 2 minutes passed. The dust was still there, and the fierce battle cries were still incessant. The 4 Ling Feng elites beside the sedan had already taken out the Type 95 wrapped in black cloth from their backs. They loaded the bullets and opened the safety. They knew clearly that with their brother's strength, if they couldn't finish off the opponent in 2 minutes, it was enough to prove that the enemy was strong. Since it was a strong enemy, they naturally had to prepare for the worst. 3 minutes passed. 5 minutes passed. Finally, some figures retreated from the dust. At a closer look, there were exactly 7 figures that retreated. Yang Wu and the others retreated. Looking at the background behind them, they still looked like they would not fall. This also caused the prostitutes to cheer. However, the 4 Ling Feng elites guarding the sedan could clearly see that Yang Wu and the others were panting heavily. Their bodies were also shaking up and down rapidly. It was obvious that it was a fierce battle just now. As time passed, the dust finally settled. Looking at the battlefield, not even a third of the opponents were able to stand. Only Qi Lu and 3 big men didn't fall. Even so, the 4 of them were covered in blood. Their breaths were heavy, and they looked like they had exhausted all their strength. Their leader, Qi Lu, had a 2-centimeter bloody hole on his left arm. Blood was flowing out from it. However, this person stared at Yang Wu as if he didn't see it. The corner of his mouth twitched a few times before he spat out a sentence. "Kid, you're not bad. But I hope you can preserve your life. I, Third Master Qi, will come for you." After leaving these words behind, Qi Lu turned around and left. He didn't have the slightest bit of reluctance. He didn't even look at the dozen or so corpses on the ground. Seeing that Qi Lu was about to leave, the 4 Ling Feng elites behind him who had already loaded their guns asked in unison, "Fifth brother, do you need us to kill him?" "No need. His skills are not bad. It would be a pity to kill him like this. This kind of person should be a good whetstone." Yang Wu raised his left hand and made a gesture to stop shooting. His body moved slightly and then his left leg half knelt on the ground. The other 6 Ling Feng elites quickly rushed over and protected Yang Wu in the middle. Each of them asked anxiously, "Fifth brother, are you all right?" "Hee, the opponent is too tough. I was careless." After saying this, Yang Wu's body continued to lean backward. It was also at this time that everyone saw that the wound on his body was not only the one on his left leg. There was also a huge knife wound on his chest. Even his bones seemed to be exposed. In fact, the 6 Ling Feng elites who participated in the battle had more or less suffered some injuries. It was just that they weren't that serious. Seeing that Yang Wu had fainted on the ground, they cried out in alarm and lifted him up before quickly retreating. At this moment, the sound of running footsteps could be heard. It was the other Ling Feng elites who had received the signal and rushed over. The morning assembly was over. On the way back from the palace to their respective manors, they could clearly see that the number of prostitutes on both sides of the street had decreased significantly. Each of them had a solemn expression as they sent people to inquire about the situation. Soon, the news came back. It turned out that the Duke of Loyalty had bought a lot of people. In the news, the servants of the Duke of Loyalty had fought a huge battle with Third Master Qi of Blackwell Street. Both sides had suffered heavy losses. Naturally, all of the officials knew that Yang Qindong had resolved the side effects of conscription in the capital. Of all the officials in the court, only this person dared to do such a thing so brazenly. He wasn't afraid that Shiheng and the Bureau of Military Personnel would find trouble with him. Yang Qindong was young, but he had already become a duke. This was where his advantage lay. A person could be impulsive at such a young age. It seemed that it was normal for such a person to do anything. In addition, he had performed meritorious deeds and possessed great wealth. This made many people wary of him. Such a person dared to openly take in those women who couldn't survive. It was easy for others to take his actions for granted. There were even some righteous and impartial officials who praised Yang Qindong's actions in their hearts. However, there were also some officials who thought that the Duke of Loyalty was trying to buy people's hearts. Perhaps there were some things that they couldn't do, but they didn't want others to do it. Otherwise, whoever did it would be his enemy. It was precisely this group of people who harbored hatred in their hearts, but they couldn't do anything. After all, this person had performed great meritorious deeds for the court. If they had to calculate it seriously, perhaps even the emperor owed him a great favor. In addition, he had a marriage alliance with the Minister of Rights, Hu Shao. How could such a person be so easy to deal with? It was precisely because they couldn't do anything that they secretly praised the Duke of Loyalty in their hearts when they heard that he had fought with Third Master Qi of Blackwell Street. They even thought that this time, the Duke of Loyalty had kicked a stone and was going to suffer a little. Therefore, Blackwell Street, which no one wanted to provoke and was afraid of trouble, became the focus of all the officials. This was especially so for Commander Shiheng. After hearing the news from his subordinate, he even clapped his hands in delight. Good, good. Blackwell Street is a stubborn rock and also a dirty puddle. Whoever encounters it will be in trouble. This Duke of Loyalty actually provoked them. There will be a good show to watch. How about this? Send someone to keep an eye on that place. I want to see whether boss who is more powerful or this Duke of Loyalty who is not afraid of death can take advantage of it. After saying this to his subordinate, Shiheng seemed to still feel unsatisfied. As if he had thought of something, he suddenly stood up and said to his personal guard, "Make the arrangements. Marquis wants to enter the palace to meet the emperor." At this time, Shiheng was like a fly that had seen a cracked egg. He was full of fighting spirit. However, what he didn't expect was that he wasn't the only one who received the news to enter the palace to meet the emperor. The Minister of War, Yi Ming, also heard the news after returning home and hurried to the palace. The two met in front of the palace gate. When they saw each other, they were first stunned, then burst into laughter. At this moment, it was as if they had seen through each other's thoughts. Chapter 301. In the main hall, Zhu Qiyu received two important ministers. He didn't understand why the two ministers would appear together after the court meeting was over. When he looked at Shiheng and Yi Ming suspiciously, the two ministers said in unison, "Your Majesty, the opportunity has come." The opportunity had indeed come. Speaking of which, Yang Qindong had indeed made great contributions. But because his contributions were so great, it was a bit of a shock to the emperor. Any wise and ambitious emperor would not allow his ministers to make too great a contribution. This kind of existence that could threaten the imperial power at any time would always make people unable to sleep and eat in peace. Usually, the way to solve such a problem was to get rid of the great contributor. Only in this way could one really sleep soundly. But unfortunately, under the chaotic situation, he couldn't find a way to get rid of Yang Qindong. He didn't even have a valid reason to do this. Of course, Zhu Qiyu hesitated because the relationship between the Duke of Loyalty and the mercenaries was very good. Once the attack failed, the consequences would be unimaginable. Shiheng and Yi Ming had naturally seen through Zhu Qiyu's thoughts. But they were also at their wits' end, so they had been waiting for an opportunity. Everyone would make mistakes. As long as they kept an eye on it, they wouldn't have to worry about not finding a way to solve the problem. But they didn't expect the opportunity to come so soon. Yang Chendong had offended Blackwell Street and Boss Hu, a person they usually didn't want to offend. Boss Hu was powerful because he dared to risk his life and had many subordinates who dared to risk their lives. Unless you could kill such a person with a stick, there would be endless trouble in the future. They would probably live under terrible pressure every day. How could Yang Chendong not be the same? With the mercenaries protecting him, if they couldn't kill him, who knew what kind of evil consequences would appear? This was also why everyone tolerated Yang Chendong even though they knew that he sometimes ignored the imperial power. And now, these two ferocious tigers had actually collided, which undoubtedly became an opportunity to tamper with the situation. If it was done well, there would be no problem for both sides to suffer. When faced with an opportunity, a wise man would naturally seize it. When Yiming and Shiheng talked about the opportunity, they were naturally referring to the opportunity to get rid of Yang Chendong. Not only could he kill someone, but he could also frame Big Boss Hu and make the higher-ups of the mercenary army helpless. How could he not cherish this method of killing two birds with one stone? While Zhu Qiyu was still sitting on the dragon throne, thinking about what an opportunity was, Shiheng and Yiming gave her a general idea of what had happened. Seeing the excitement on the faces of the two important ministers, Zhu Qiyu finally understood that the opportunity to deal with Yang Chendong had come. As for Yang Chendong, it was just as the officials had guessed. Zhu Qiyu already had the intention to kill him. This person's merits were so high that he could shake the emperor. Zhu Qiyu naturally did not want to let go of the opportunity to eliminate him. In history, such meritorious officials did not know who they were. For example, during the Qin dynasty, Lu Buwei was called second father and was forced to commit suicide. Li Mu defeated the Xiongnu and returned to the Qin dynasty. He used a scheme to sow dissension and was killed by King Zhao. Han Xian, Peng Yu, Yingbu, and others were all killed by Liu Bang. The ancient king was called Gu, which meant that he was lonely. It meant that his good friends who had helped him were all dead. Only when the king was lonely would his position be more stable. Zhu Qiyu was now practicing the art of the emperor. Naturally, he had long known that Yang Chendong's existence was a threat. Often, even if such a person did not have the intention to rebel, once his subordinates were put on the emperor's robe, who knew what would happen? It was only because of the existence of the mercenary army and in order to stabilize the overall situation and consolidate the imperial power that Zhu Qiyu did not act rashly. Fortunately, he was still young. Even if he waited, there would be many opportunities. Wasn't that right? Now the opportunity had come. Zhu Qiyu, who was happy and even a little excited, did show the face of an emperor perfectly. After hearing the general idea of Shiheng and Yiming, he coughed and said, "I didn't rest well yesterday and am very tired now. If there is anything, just discuss it with Minister Jin. I trust you." After saying these words, Zhu Qiyu turned around and left. His final decision was to trust them. In response, Shiheng and Yiming looked at each other and said respectfully, "Farewell, Your Majesty." Long live, long live. Zhu Qiyu left, leaving behind his trusted aide Jining. This was a clear indication of his attitude. That was, you can kill him. You can do as you see fit. As for how you do it and how you do it, it has nothing to do with me. Drawing a clear line in the sand in advance, once there was a problem, he could retreat freely. It was a good plan. Shiheng, Yiming, and Jining naturally saw this. But who was the emperor? Originally, he could say whatever he wanted with the word official. Jining and the other two were left in the hall. The beardless eunuch smiled and said, "Sirs, please come to my side hall. It's windy and quiet there." By windy and quiet, he meant safer. Shiheng and Yiming, who understood, smiled and agreed. Then, the three of them left the hall. In the depths of Blackwell Street. In a dirty and messy courtyard. From afar, this place did not seem to be any different from other places. But in reality, this was one of the lairs of the Black Water Gang's boss, Hu Huaihai. It was said that a crafty rabbit had 3 burrows. Hu Huaihai indeed had 5 similar courtyards. Every courtyard was as ordinary as this, but very few people knew that there were secret passageways under these inconspicuous courtyards that led directly to the forest outside the city. It took a lot of effort to dig this tunnel. In the end, the workers who dug the tunnel and were paid a lot of money were all buried, making this tunnel even more unknown. Killing and robbing and being righteous were the 2 personalities of Hu Huaihai. To outsiders, he would stop at nothing. Vicious and merciless was not enough to describe him. Because of this, there was no one in Blackwell Street who did not fear the boss Hu Huaihai. Some people even called him King of Hell Hu in private. To his own people, he was generous and forthright. If you encountered any difficulties or had any requests, he would definitely help if he could. When such a reputation spread, many people came to join him and eventually became his subordinates. With these 2 methods, Hu Huaihai really made people angry and hateful. But to be able to establish a foothold in Blackwell Street, which was a paradise for gangsters and even a sanctuary for murderers, and become the biggest force, it was not only because Hu Huaihai's methods were extraordinary, but also because he had 2 very loyal brothers, the second brother Wu Yong and the third brother Qi Lu. Qi Lu's knife skills were powerful. This could be seen from the fact that he was slightly better than Yang Wu. Wu Yong was even more powerful. Not only was his skill not inferior to Qi Lu, but his brain was also better. Many times, when Hu Huaihai, as the boss, made important decisions, his opinion was the most important. At this time, in this ordinary small courtyard, Hu Huaihai was looking at Qi Lu, whose left arm had been bandaged, with concern. He said, "Third brother, how is your arm?" "What did the doctor say?" "Big brother, it's fine. It won't be long before brother can be lively again." Qi Lu's expression was calm, but the light of anger in his eyes was flickering. It could be seen that the injury was not as simple and easy as he said. The triage bayonet was a very powerful weapon. In the future, even the United Nations banned it. It could be seen that its lethality was huge. After being stabbed by Yang Wu, blood kept flowing out, forcing Qi Lu to stop and return. Fortunately, there was an excellent wound medicine here. In addition, the injury was not a vital part, so the bleeding finally stopped. But the doctor also said that even if the arm was healed, it would not be as flexible as before. Thinking that half of his good left arm was crippled, how could Qi Lu not be angry? Just when Hu Huaihai asked, he said with a face full of hatred, "Big brother, this time brother suffered a loss because of this weapon. No matter what, I have to take revenge. Otherwise, how can I have a foothold in the world in the future? That's natural. Since brother was bullied, big brother naturally has to take revenge. Second brother, tell me, what should we do?" Hu Huaihai replied magnanimously. Then, his gaze fell on the second brother, Wu Yong, who had been thinking with his eyes closed. Wu Yong, who was known as the military advisor, slowly opened his eyes after Hu Huaihai asked the question. Then, he gently shook his head and said, "Big brother, third brother, I'm afraid this matter is not easy to handle." "What's not easy to handle?" "We'll just take advantage of his unpreparedness and kill him." Qi Lu, who had suffered a loss, said with a voice full of emotion. "That's right, what's not easy to handle? Could it be that our Blackwater gang is afraid of an official who only has a title and no real power?" Hu Huaihai said disapprovingly. Hearing the analysis of big brother and third brother, Wu Yong's face showed a trace of bitterness. This loyal duke is not someone without real power. Although he does not have any real position, he is protected by the world's most elite mercenaries. You know about the mercenaries, right? It's said that they have an advanced firearm that can easily take a person's life from 100 feet away. It's not good to provoke them. It's just firearms. Don't the Ming army have plenty of them? But in third brother's opinion, the firearms camp is just a so-so. They didn't provoke us, but since they provoked us, we'll definitely teach them a lesson. Qi Lu, who had a bad temper, heard the words firearms and said without thinking. "That's not true. The firearms of these mercenaries cannot be compared to the firearms of the Ming Army's firearms camp. I heard that the firearms in their hands are more accurate and can even fire continuously. It's not easy to deal with them. Moreover, from what third brother said, he brought more than 10 experts, but in the end, he only brought back 3. They didn't even leave behind a single life, and this was because they didn't use firearms. Even their martial arts are so good. This kind of opponent cannot be underestimated. Chapter 302. Wu Yong kept explaining. However, when he said the last sentence, Hu Huaihai's eyes lit up after hearing it. Second brother said that we can't underestimate them. That means we can still deal with them, but we need to plan carefully, right? Is that so, second brother? Hearing that there was still a way, Qi Lu couldn't help but be interested. Yes, we need to plan wisely. How about this? Give me 2 days to investigate the other party's background. Wu Yong nodded. He had a feeling that this great Ming Empire's loyal duke, who had just reached 20 years of age, would not be easy to deal with. However, even though Old Third had suffered a loss, if they just admitted it like this, then how could the Blackwater gang be looked up to in the future? How could they have a foothold? In other words, they had to make a move. It was just a matter of how they did it. In short, when facing such an opponent, they either didn't make a move, or if they did, they would make a move. They definitely couldn't give them a chance to counterattack. Yang family manor. Yang Wu was actually carried back. This matter instantly alarmed Yang Qindong, who was teaching students at the Yang Family Academy. When he strode into the courtyard, he saw Tiger's man and the other standing there angrily. He asked in a deep voice, "Who can tell me what's going on?" "Sixth young master, it's like this." 2 people who were responsible for protecting Xiao Yin's safety stood up. With one person taking the lead and the other supplementing, they recounted the scene that happened in Laoshan Street today in detail. Just as the 2 brothers finished speaking, a doctor walked out of the room. He was instantly surrounded by people. Yang Qindong was no longer as calm as before. His expression was somewhat anxious. "Dr. Li, how is it?" This physician Li was a renowned figure in the capital. Seeing that the Duke of Loyal Courage was personally asking him, he didn't dare to be negligent. "Greetings, Duke Yang. Yang Wu's body is fine. He's just bleeding a little. Moreover, the injury has avoided the important parts. He just needs to rest for a period of time to recover." Upon hearing that Yang Wu's life was not in danger, Yang Qindong let out a long sigh of relief. Beta Persei, arrange for someone to send Dr. Li back to the city and triple the consultation fee. "Oh, you're too polite." Dr. Li was flattered after listening to Wang Yao. However, Yang Qindong carried it out and cupped his hands in greeting. The other party politely returned the greeting and then left satisfied. After the doctor left, Beta Persei quickly rushed back. At this moment, he saw Yang Qindong listening to Yang San, the deputy director of the security bureau, giving a detailed report about Haging Street and the Blackwater gang. "Young master, that's all the information we've gathered. That place is filled with crooks and honest folk, so it's not easy to enter. Every once in a while, Boss Hu of the Blackwater gang would clean up the place. There was one time when our informant almost didn't make it out alive." Yang San lowered his head as he spoke. The situation of Haging Street was not easy to inquire about because of Hu Huaihai's caution, but more importantly, it was not the focus of the Security Bureau's investigation. It was just a group of Jianghu people and desperados. With the idea of well water not interfering with river water, they only did a simple investigation. Yang Qindong naturally knew this, but he did not say it out loud. After all, the Security Bureau had not been established for a long time and had limited manpower. The capital was so big that it was understandable that some things could not be investigated clearly. Investigate again. I want to know the details in a day. Since the 6th young master had spoken, Yang San did not dare to be negligent. He immediately agreed as if he was making a military order. Please rest assured, young master. In less than a day, there will be specific information. In this world, as long as one was willing to spend money, there was nothing that could not be done. Most of those people ran for their lives because of money. If they could be a good rich man, who would be willing to stay in such a place and waste their days? Yang San hurriedly left. Yang Qindong did not choose to wait. Instead, he went into the room and looked at Yang Wu, who was sleeping soundly. Then he called Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei. When they were in the study, he looked at the two with bright eyes and asked, "How is it? Now you know that there will always be someone stronger than you." "Young master, we were wrong." Yang Qindong's face was stiff, and the two hurriedly bowed their heads and admitted their mistake. The reason why they were wrong was because they had disobeyed Yang Qindong's orders. According to the sixth young master's criticism, a gentleman should not stand under a dangerous wall. If they felt that things were dangerous, they should leave as soon as possible. If they had to make a move, they could have used guns instead of showing off their courage. If today's matter had been solved with guns, Yang Wu would not have been injured at all. But he insisted on competing with others in martial arts, which led to such a result. This was naturally taught by Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei. They taught him that it was difficult to find an opponent, that he should be defeated alone, and that when he met a person from the martial arts world, he should use the martial arts world's way to solve it. What was the result? He had almost lost his life. According to the two Ling Feng's words, if they had not used a sharp weapon like the 3 bayonets, it was likely that Yang Wu would have been carried back as a corpse. The so-called rules were not ironclad rules. They almost lost their brothers' lives. It was no wonder that Yang Qindong would make things difficult for them. It's good that you know your mistakes. The two of you will each lose a month's salary. Also, all your subordinates who always talk about the rules of the martial arts world will be treated the same. If there is anyone else who is not satisfied, let him come find me. This young master will shoot him. It's better than one day he will become a ghost under someone else's knife. Yang Qindong's voice was not loud, but it was like a thunderclap in Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei's ears. The two of them kept nodding their heads and admitting their mistakes. After a while, it seemed that Yang Qindong's anger had subsided a little. Beta Persei took the initiative to say, "Young master, this time we suffered a loss. We can't just let it go like this." "Yes, young master. This Blackwater gang is not a good thing to begin with. It's better to just destroy it." Tiger's Mane also chimed in. "Of course we can't just let it go like this. It's just that they have existed for so many years and the government can't do anything about them. If we want to move against them, we need to plan. If we act rashly, we won't be able to take down all the enemies. That will only cause endless trouble in the future." Yang Qindong nodded. Of course, he would not let any of his enemies go. But since he was going to make a move, he had to hit them with one blow. He absolutely could not leave any hidden dangers for himself. On this point, Yang Qindong and Wu Yong's thoughts coincided. At the same time, both sides sent people to inquire about each other's background. Outside of the two sides, another group of people also appeared. That was Yi Ming's coachman, who was also one of his bodyguards. Yi Ming used to work in the military and had experience working at the grassroots level. That was how he got to know the Ministry of War and climbed up step by step. It was at that time that he came into contact with some of the people in the martial arts world and gave some favors to them, allowing them to work for him. This coachman was one of them. His surname was Shi Tao, and he used to have some fame in the martial arts world. His skills were also not bad. However, because this person had always been low-key and considered himself a coachman, protecting Yi Ming, not many people knew him. This time, he was sent out to deal with the Blackwater gang, who seemed to be from the martial arts world. Shi Tao first left the Yi residence, then went to the streets. After making many turns, he changed into a martial arts person's attire and entered Haging Street, where he met the third master of the Blackwater gang, Qi Lu. Compared to his eldest brother, who was low-key and even somewhat secretive, Qi Lu was much more flamboyant. Even on the streets of Haging Street, he was often seen. Through this person, Shi Tao told him the purpose of his visit and hinted that he had a way to deal with the Duke of Loyalty. Regarding this unfamiliar person, if it was any other time, Shi Lu naturally wouldn't have introduced him. But yesterday, just as he was discussing with his eldest brother and second brother about how to deal with this person, someone delivered himself to their door. Whether it was an enemy or a friend, he still needed to meet him. Thus, he brought Shi Tao to Hu Huaihai's other resting place. Coincidentally, his second brother, Wu Yong, was also there, so the four of them met. According to Shi Tao, he was someone who couldn't stand the Duke of Loyalty's actions. After hearing about what happened in Laoshan Street yesterday, his master decided to lend him a helping hand. He promised to think of a way to transfer away the Duke of Loyalty's elites, giving the Blackwater gang a chance to deal a fatal blow. He clearly stated the purpose of his visit, but when it came to who his master was, he closed his mouth and didn't say anything. It seemed that he wouldn't say a word more. Regarding this, the skeptical Hu Huaihai didn't agree to anything on the spot. Instead, he had someone arrange for Shi Tao to rest first, saying that he and the others would discuss it and give an answer. After Shi Tao left and there was no one else around, Hu Huaihai asked Wu Yong about this matter. "Second brother, what do you think of this person?" "Big brother, whether he is an enemy or a friend, whether he is a friend or not. If he is a spy sent by the Duke of Loyalty, as long as we do it well and guide him well, we can also use him. On the other hand, if he is someone who came to help us, then he can be a big help." Wu Yong's analysis was thorough. Looking at his meaning, no matter who Shi Tao was, since he came, he had to be used by him. "That's right." Hu Huaihai nodded in agreement. Then, he thought of something and asked, "That's right, second brother, how is your investigation of the Duke of Loyalty?" When it came to this question, Wu Yong's expression became a lot more serious. He first looked at his third brother, Qi Lu, then looked at Hu Huaihai and said, "Big brother, this time the idea is really difficult to deal with." In the following time, Wu Yong reported the situation that he had investigated in the evening and the morning. For example, Yang Chendong was quite talented and had a mind for business. He also came from a famous family, and was not careless even when fighting a war. Something about establishing the Yang Bao, creating the immortal abode, sky beyond heaven, and the Yang family bank, and so on. Also, a while ago, Lu San was hired by someone to deal with him, and in the end, he was defeated and died. Chapter 303. Previously, the Blackwater gang focused their attention on Heijing Street. In their eyes, this was their territory. If one had to describe it, it could even be regarded as a country within a country. Therefore, they didn't pay much attention to the outside world. They only knew that the great Ming dynasty had a young Dong Shuai and a loyal and courageous duke. But even if he was an official, he had nothing to do with them. There didn't seem to be any boundaries between the two sides. Even if they couldn't be seen in public, they wouldn't have any interactions with him. However, due to the fact that they were trying to snatch people from each other, they actually got into a fight. Subsequently, they even suffered quite a bit. Now, the entire city knew about this. Unless the Blackwater gang didn't plan to stay in the capital anymore, they had to get back their face. Thus, he began to investigate this person. However, the more he knew, the more shocked Wu Yong was. When he told this to his eldest brother and third brother, he had a serious expression on his face. "Oh. In that case, he is indeed a capable person." Hu Huaihai's expression became incomparably dignified after hearing this. He had thought before that if it was an official, it wouldn't be difficult to deal with him in his own way. On the other hand, if it was a person from the Jianghu, it wouldn't be difficult to deal with him according to the rules of the Jianghu. But now, he heard that this person had power, money, influence, and even people. It was very difficult to deal with him. Especially when Wu Yong had mentioned the mercenaries. He had heard of this name before. After all, when the Walla army attacked the city, it was the mercenaries who drove them away. It was said that there were only a few hundred of them, but they managed to drive away the tens of thousands of Walla elite cavalry. At least the Blackwater gang couldn't do such a thing. If the mercenaries were to target him this time, what were his chances of winning? Hu Huaihai was still silent. At the side, the outspoken and grumpy Qi Lu said, "Why do you care so much? We are earthen pots, and he is porcelain. Could it be that he really wants to go head-to-head with us? Besides, even if both sides suffer, as long as Big Brother and Second Brother are still here, can't we occupy a mountain and form a team? When the time comes, I'll just take my revenge. At that time, I'll annoy him to death." Although Qi Lu's words were reckless, both Hu Huaihai and Wu Yong agreed. With the complicated terrain of Blackwell Street, even if he couldn't beat them, he could still escape, right? As long as there was life, there was no need to worry about firewood. They understood this principle. That loyal and daring Duke was a smart person, so of course, he would also understand. He first thought of the worst-case scenario and realized that it wasn't a big deal. He would just have to start all over again. Then, the three brothers began to discuss how to deal with Yang Qindong. According to past practice, assassination was the most suitable method. This was also pointed out by Wu Yong. This Duke of Loyalty must die. As long as he doesn't die, I'm afraid that we brothers will face the danger of death at any time. At the same time, we won't be able to establish ourselves in Jianghu. That was how the people of Jianghu were. Sometimes, they valued their reputation more than their lives. Since they suffered a loss in the hands of Yang Qindong, if they didn't get back their reputation, the Blackwater gang would have no prestige to speak of. Naturally, they wouldn't be far from falling apart. On this point, Yang Qindong was also very clear. As far as this matter was concerned, even if he didn't pursue it now, the other party wouldn't let it go. Not to mention, Yang Wu was still lying in a hospital bed. Although it was said that he could recover after a period of rest, his brother was injured. If he didn't do anything, he would also disappoint his brother. Not to mention, the name of the loyal and daring Duke was useless. Just based on this point, those who didn't open their eyes would have to be taught a lesson. In addition, at noon, Yang San personally sent some information about the Blackwater gang. Looking at their actions, he was even more determined to not let this gang stay. This time, the Security Bureau spent a lot of effort and spent a lot of money to bribe some Jianghu people who usually mingled in Blackwell Street. From their mouth, they knew that this Blackwater gang really didn't shrink from any evil. Forcing the good into prostitution, bullying the good, opening casinos, and loaning money were common occurrences. The reason why they had a conflict with Yang Wu and the others this time was that they saw that there were too many prostitutes in the city and wanted to come out and get a share of the profits. Moreover, the information also showed that once the women were snatched by the Blackwater gang, they would be sold out of the capital, and the destination was the grassland in the north. They would be sold to the Walla and Tatar territories to become tools for those barbarians to produce the next generation or become targets for the other party to seek pleasure. Whether it was in the previous life or this life, if there was one person that Yang Qindong hated the most in his heart, it was undoubtedly the traitors. This kind of person had no ruler, no father, no country, and no home. For the sake of profit, they could really sell anything. Such a person was even worse than pigs and dogs. The way the Blackwater gang did things was no different from the traitors. Although the Great Ming and the Walla had stopped fighting, and under Yang Qindong's urging, the two sides had even started to trade, all of this was just a delaying tactic. It was to leave enough time for them to rear a fat sheep and slaughter it in one fell swoop. But the Blackwater gang's actions were clearly to help the other side grow stronger. Had they ever thought about how many people the women would bring to the other side in a decade or so once they entered the grassland? And how many Han people would die under the iron hooves of these foreign men? When he thought of this, Yang Qindong was so angry that he couldn't vent his anger. In his heart, he had already made up his mind to deal with them. How about this? Go and arrange something. Remember, it has to be a big deal. Yang Qindong whispered a few orders into Yang San's ear. Hearing this, the deputy chief of the Security Bureau, who was actually the manager, nodded repeatedly. The immortal abode of the capital. Ever since it was built and opened for business, it had been very prosperous. Apart from the disturbance caused by the Japanese envoy a while ago, which caused a certain loss in business, it had always been difficult to find a table. Now that the Japanese army had suddenly landed in the Tianjin garrison and attacked the Great Ming's army, the Duke of Loyalty was able to extricate himself from this matter, and the business here continued to flourish. Because of the prosperity, and because the customers were all high-ranking officials and nobles, the security here had always been excellent. No matter how angry they were, few people dared to cause trouble here. As time passed, the security here was no longer as strict as before. Not only that, but even the soldiers of the 5 cities' warden's office were becoming fewer and fewer in number. But sometimes, the more confident you were, the easier it was for something to happen. That evening, for example, the immortal abode was originally bustling with noise and excitement, with singing and dancing, and the sounds of toasting and exchanging cups filling the air. But all of a sudden, a commotion broke out outside. Soon after, a few pieces of rock flew up from the ground and smashed into the transparent glass, causing a series of shattering sounds. The sudden chaos caused the diners in the immortal abode to panic. 2 of them were even unlucky enough to be injured by glass shards. The dancers in the stand screamed in unison, making it seem like the end of the world had arrived. Fortunately, the chaos ended as quickly as it started. By the time the immortal abode's guards ran out, the troublemakers had already fled west. They chased them all the way until they saw them enter Blackwell Street. Only then did they stop and return. With so many witnesses present, the immortal abode immediately pointed the finger of blame at the Blackwater gang. Thinking back to the conflict yesterday, anyone who wasn't an idiot could see the cause and effect. The 5 cities' warden's office arrived, as did the Supreme Court. When they heard the clamor of the diners, they knew that things weren't going well. These Blackwater gang members were a bit too bold. They actually dared to provoke the Duke of Loyalty in such a public manner. They really didn't know how to write the word death. News of anything that happened to Yang Chendong always spread quickly. Shi Heng, who was in the barracks, and the Minister of War, Ming, who was in his residence, both received the news. However, the 2 of them had the same reaction. This was a trap from the start. First of all, they had already sent people to contact the Blackwater gang and were waiting for them to join forces. Then again, if they wanted to deal with Yang Chendong, they wouldn't have resorted to such a painless method. What did smashing a few pieces of glass count for? Although it was expensive, for the wealthy Duke of Loyalty, it wasn't even a drop in the ocean. If they did this, not only would they not be able to do anything to the Duke of Loyalty, but it would also arouse the anger of others. Even if everyone had a common enemy, it was really the behavior of a stupid pig. Since the Blackwater gang could occupy Haging Street for so long, they wouldn't only have such an IQ. If they didn't do it, there seemed to be only one answer. It was that some people directed and acted out a play. It was just that both of them could see it, and even some smart people could see it. But things had already happened, especially when there were rumors in the marketplace, saying that the Blackwater gang was afraid of the Duke of Loyalty, but they couldn't take it lying down, so they used the method of warning. As soon as such news came out, the public was outraged and condemned the Blackwater gang. At the same time, it was tantamount to giving Yang Chendong an excuse to make things bigger. Sure enough, just when Shi Heng and Yi Ming were still worried about whether Yang Chendong would take advantage of this matter, the Supreme Court, the Ministry of Justice, and the 5 cities' warden's office received Yang Chendong's visit. The general idea was that they had to give an explanation for this matter. Even the Ministry of Revenue received Yang Chendong's visit. The general idea was that if the government couldn't guarantee the lawful rights and interests of merchants, was there any need to pay the business tax? This was the Duke of Loyalty, the leader of the merchants of the capital. Although there was no rule that said that all merchants would listen to him, if he raised the issue of whether the business tax should be paid or not, then he would definitely have many supporters. After receiving Yang Chendong's visit, the Yamans didn't dare to be careless and reported the matter to the imperial palace. The chief eunuch, Jining, didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he saw these memorials, but he inwardly praised Yang Chendong's method of diverting disaster. He knew that he had no choice but to take care of the Blackwater gang. It was at this moment that Shi Hang and Yi Ming entered the palace and found Jining. But to everyone's surprise, the two of them had faint excitement on their faces. "Eunuch Jean, we've received news that they've decided to go all out. Our chance has come." Chapter 304. Because of yesterday's incident, Wu Yong had sent people to keep an eye on Yang Qindong's properties, hoping to find some weak link. It was at this time that someone threw rocks at the immortal abode. When his subordinates reported this, his expression changed. He knew that the other party was looking for an excuse to make a move. After all, yesterday's incident was a personal grudge between Yang Qindong and the Blackwater gang. If he mobilized people to cause trouble because of this, it would be the same as giving some people an excuse. This was the crux of the matter. Previously, Wu Yong had been wondering what kind of method the Duke of Loyalty would use to deal with him, but the other party had quickly given him an answer. What could he do if the other party used an obvious scheme to deal with him? He couldn't possibly take the initiative to go to the authorities and say that the matter wasn't his doing. In that case, he would probably be immediately arrested. While praising the Duke of Loyalty's vicious plan, Wu Yong found his big brother and third brother and called over Shi Tao. He said that he was willing to cooperate, and asked that they give them a chance to fight. Of course, the Blackwater gang had another choice, and that was to give up on their current territory and leave the capital. This way, they might be able to preserve their lives, but their reputation in the Jianghu would naturally be lost. Those who bullied the weak and feared the strong would find it difficult to survive anywhere. In other words, even if they left, they couldn't just leave in such a muddled manner. There was only one path in front of them, and that was to wrestle with this bold and loyal duke. If they left when they were no match for him, at least others wouldn't look down on them so much. Since they had no choice but to fight, Shi Tao came in handy. The three brothers called him over and told him of their decision, having him make arrangements as soon as possible. Thus, Shi Tao returned to the Yi residence and met with Old Master Yi Ming. That was why Yi Ming and Shi Hang had joined hands to enter the palace. Yi Ming, Shi Hang, and Jining discussed in a secret room for more than 2 hours. When they emerged, they all had smiles on their faces, as if they were about to complete some important mission. The Yang clan manor. After Yang Qindong diverted the trouble, the warden's office and the Supreme Court sent back news that night. He expressed that he would send troops to wipe out the Blackwater gang, but this power had been here for many years, it was not easy to deal with them. He asked whether he should ask the Duke of Loyalty and Courage to personally deal with them. After all, he was someone who had defeated Walla's army with ease. A small underworld gang was definitely no match for him. Everything was going according to plan. Yang Qindong looked at the two Yaman's replies and sneered. He said to Tiger's Mane, "Tell them that this young master will personally lead people there. Let's set the time for tomorrow morning. We need to catch them off guard." "Young master, why are you in such a hurry? How many of our brothers have not returned from the Dark Well Street? I heard that they have a secret passage that leads to the outside world." Tiger's Mane repeated the news he received from the Security Bureau in the afternoon. This was the news that the captain of the Langia Special Forces, Tai Hu, had personally found out. Until now, this person had not returned from the Dark Well Street. Secret passage? With this young master taking action, there is no use for any secret passage. Let Tai Hu and the others come back, and then we will arrange it like this. Yang Qindong shook his head indifferently. He already had an idea on how to deal with this underworld gang. Since they dared to scheme against him, then there was no need to keep them alive. In order to achieve the effect of a surprise attack, he decided to end the battle quickly, not giving the other party more time to prepare and consider. Since the young master was so confident, Tiger's Mane naturally did not try to persuade him. He agreed and left to pass on the message. The soldiers of the warden's office in the 5 cities, the bailiffs and constables of the Supreme Court, who were off duty at home, received the urgent order to recall them. For a moment, there were hurried footsteps on the streets of the capital. At the same time, the the news also reached the dark Well Street. At the Blackwater Gang's boss, Hu Huaihai's place, Shi Tao informed the 3 leaders of the order from above, and then quietly left. Obviously, he also knew that they were going to discuss the details of the operation, and his presence was inconvenient. When there was no one else in the room, Hu Huaihai looked at Wu Yong and Qi Lu with a sinister gaze and said, "Second brother, third brother, this Duke of Loyalty can't help but want to make a move on us. At this moment, I'm afraid that even if we want to hide, there is no time. Yes, the arrow on the bow has to be shot, but it is a pity that we are not fully prepared. Right now, there are still some brothers who are not out on the streets." Wu Yong said with a sigh. Yang Chendong's swift and decisive action was somewhat out of his expectations. He originally thought that they would test each other, but he did not expect that after only 1 day and 1 night, the other party had already made a move. Wu Yong did not know that although he treated himself as a dish, Yang Chendong did not put them in his eyes. They were just big rats that relied on the complicated terrain to survive in the dark corners. In today's society, as long as one was determined, eliminating them was just a matter of minutes. He really could not understand why the great Ming dynasty would allow them to exist, especially in such an important and bustling place like the capital. However, other people were afraid of trouble and were afraid of cutting the weeds without removing the roots, but Yang Chendong was not afraid. Since they had offended him, then he would teach them a lesson. At the same time, he would use this opportunity to intimidate the other officials who dared to find trouble with him. Him not making a move did not mean that he did not have a way. It was just that everyone's status was there, and it was not convenient to use 2 direct methods to solve the problem. However, this did not mean that he did not have the ability to solve the problem. What are you afraid of? It is just killing 1 person. We have already sent out more than 20 brothers, so it should be enough. Third brother Qi Lu waved his heavily injured left hand. Because of the pull, the pain came up, causing him to grimace for a while. However, his spirit was still quite good. It could be seen that the anger in his heart was very uncomfortable. If he did not find a way to release it, it would cause a serious illness. No. 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 Wu Yong straightforwardly shook his head. They did not understand this Duke of Loyalty. Although he is young, his ability cannot be underestimated. A while ago, even an important official in the court, the Minister of Justice, suffered a loss at his hands. To deal with this kind of person, if we do not have a few layers of plans, it will definitely not work. Second brother, what do you plan to do? Hu Huaihai knew Wu Yong well. He knew that Wu Yong was an expert who planned before taking action, so he asked. I plan to take a risk and send out a few more brothers. This way, the 3 of US brothers will have to split up into 3 groups. As Wu Yong spoke, he pushed the oil lamp on the table to the side. Then, he used his finger that had just dipped in tea to draw on the table. The so-called 3 groups. The first group is to guard the home and lure the Duke of Loyalty to attack. The second group is to sneak out of the city and kill toward the Yang family village, forcing him to hastily return to defend. The third group is to ambush him on the road back to the village and give him a fatal blow. This is good. Then I will bring people to attack the Yang family village. I heard that this Duke of Loyalty has 4 beauties. I want to let him know that there are some people that he cannot afford to offend. After listening to Wu Yong's analysis, Qi Lu took the initiative to bring the second group. In his opinion, any ambush or entrenched defense was too meaningless, and it was far less straightforward and satisfying than directly charging out. After Qi Lu finished choosing, Wu Yong also volunteered. Then, we will rely on Big Brother to defend the home. Second brother will bring people to ambush outside. Hopefully, we can succeed in one strike. The reason why Wu Yong chose to set up an ambush was because he knew that as the boss, Hu Huaihai would not trust anyone. The tunnel in Heijing Street led to the outside world. That was the escape route. In other words, it was the safest to stay here. As expected, when Wu Yong took the initiative to set up an ambush, Hu Huaihai's face, which was originally very serious, flashed with satisfaction. Since the two brothers were so tactful, he did not have to waste his breath. He immediately nodded and said, "Then we will do as the two brothers said. This time, we will not let him return." "Yes. He will not be able to return." The night was getting darker, but at this time, the Yang family manor was brightly lit. Especially when a sharp whistle suddenly sounded above the Yang family academy's dormitory. Nearly 50 students who had entered a state of rest hurriedly got up. The all-round development of morality, intelligence, physique, beauty, and labor was not just a matter of words. It was put into practice. Even an emergency gathering like this was one of the subjects that they usually studied. When the hurried whistle sounded, all the students got up and put on their clothes as usual. When they came to the academy's courtyard, they saw the green-clothed mountain head Yang Chendong looking at them with a serious face. Although he hadn't said anything yet, everyone's intuition told them that something important must have happened. Everyone's expression couldn't help but become much more dignified. After Tiger's mane counted the number of people, he came to Yang Chendong and reported in a low voice, "Reporting to young master, all the students have gathered. Everyone is here. No one is absent." With a wave of his hand, he had Tiger's mane stand to the side. Yang Chendong took 3 steps forward, closing the distance between him and the students. Then, he swept his gaze over them and said in a clear voice, "As a truly useful talent, not only do you have to be eloquent, but you also have to be able to walk the world and be able to wield 1,000 pounds of weight with your arms. Today, this young master will bring you all to see a true battlefield. You will see the weakness of human nature and the cruelty of survival." As soon as he finished speaking, all the students' faces were filled with shock, followed by excitement and joy. As Yang Chendong's students, they naturally knew how powerful their teacher was. The great battle between the army god and the Walla was often played out in the immortal abode. Everyone could recite the plot of that battle by heart. The scene of Yang Chendong descending to the mortal world like a god and killing the enemy with a wave of his hand had made them envious. They often wondered when they would have the opportunity to see it with their own eyes. Now, an opportunity had presented itself. They could finally enter the battlefield, and they would be following the army god. How glorious would that be? You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.